She left her wedding ring on the kitchen table with a note that read, "I stopped waiting for you the night you stopped coming home." No goodbye, no argument, no final ultimatum, just silence where a woman used to be. Adrian Valenti had built an empire that made grown men tremble at the sound of his name. He had survived betrayals, wars, and enemies who wanted him buried. But nothing had ever prepared him for the morning he came home and found the house completely, absolutely, permanently empty. If you've ever loved someone until it broke, you stay with me. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The clock on the kitchen wall read 4:53 in the morning when Adrian Valenti finally pulled his car into the driveway of the house he called home. He was tired in the way that powerful men pretended they never got tired. A deep, bone-level exhaustion that lived somewhere behind his eyes and never fully went away anymore. His tie was loosened. His jacket was folded over the passenger seat. His phone had stopped ringing 2 hours ago, which meant his men had finally handled what needed handling, and the crisis that had kept him away from home for the third night this week had been contained, controlled, and filed away like every other problem he'd ever encountered. Adrian Valenti solved problems. That was what he did. That was what he had always done. He stepped out of the car without hurrying. Men like him didn't hurry. Hurrying implied desperation, and desperation implied weakness. And weakness was the one thing Adrian had spent 39 years refusing to show anyone. He expected Elena to be asleep. He had stopped expecting her to wait up months ago, somewhere around the time she had stopped meeting him at the door with that look in her eyes, the one that had started as worry and slowly over years he couldn't quite name, transformed into something quieter and much more devastating. Not anger, not accusation, just a kind of tired acceptance that he had told himself was peace. He had been wrong about that. He would understand later how spectacularly wrong he had been. But standing in the driveway at 4:53 in the morning, Adrian Valenti was still a man who believed he understood everything. He unlocked the front door. The house was dark. That was normal. What was not normal, what registered somewhere in the back of his mind as slightly inexplicably wrong, was the quality of the silence inside. Every house had its own silence when the people inside it slept. There was a warmth to that silence, a sense of breath and heartbeat and living weight. The silence that met Adrian when he stepped through the front door had none of that. He walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. That was when he saw it. Her wedding ring sat on the kitchen table, catching the pale light from the window above the sink, and beside it was a single folded piece of paper with his name written on the outside in Elena's handwriting. Small, precise, careful. The handwriting of a woman who thought before she put anything on paper. Adrian stood absolutely still for a moment. Then he set his keys down very slowly beside the ring, the way a man sets something down, when his hands have gone slightly numb, and he looked at both objects for a long moment before he reached out and picked up the letter. He read it once, then he read it again. The third time through, he had to sit down. The letter was not what he expected. He had told himself during the walk from the door to the kitchen that if there was a note, it would be emotional. It would contain accusations and grievances, and the exhausting catalog of everything he had done wrong over the past 5 years. He had prepared himself for that. He knew how to receive criticism and let it pass through him like water through stone. Elena's letter was 7 sentences long. Adrian, I made you a dinner tonight and waited until midnight. I have made you dinner and waited until midnight 142 times in the last 2 years. I counted. I am not leaving because I hate you. I am leaving because I have finally understood that you are not coming back to this marriage, and I have been the only one who didn't know it. I am not angry. I am not asking for anything. I only want you to understand that I loved you more completely than you will ever fully know, and I deserved better than being your afterthought. Please don't look for me. Elena. Adrian sat at the kitchen table for 11 minutes, he knew, because he watched the clock on the microwave the entire time, and watching the clock was the only thing that kept him from doing something he couldn't reverse. Then he stood up. He picked up her wedding ring. He held it in his palm and looked at it, A simple gold band with a small diamond, the ring she had specifically chosen herself. The ring she had said was enough. The ring she had worn every day for 5 years without once asking for anything more expensive. And for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Valenti felt something move in his chest that wasn't anger and wasn't strategy, and wasn't the cold, calculating calm that had served him so well in every other area of his life. It felt if he was being honest with himself, and honesty was not his strongest quality, it felt like grief. He closed his fist around the ring. "Elena," he said to the empty kitchen. Nobody answered. He called her cell phone at 5 in the morning. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He called again. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He sat in the kitchen until 6, not moving, the ring still in his hand, his phone on the table in front of him, and then he did something he almost never did. He called Marco Esposito. Marco was his right hand, his closest associate, the man who had been at Adrian's side since they were 22 years old and running errands for men who were now afraid of them. Marco answered on the second ring, which meant he wasn't asleep, which meant he already knew something was wrong. "Boss," Marco said. "Elena is gone," Adrian said. There was a pause. Gone as in not here. Gone as in her phone is disconnected. Gone as in I need you to find her. Another pause, longer this time. "Adrian." "Marco." "Yeah." A heavy exhale. "Give me an hour." "Give me 20 minutes. He hung up. He walked through the house slowly, methodically, the way he walked through any situation that required assessment. The bedroom closet, nearly half her clothes were missing. Not everything. A specific selection: practical clothes, warm layers, the shoes she wore when comfort mattered more than appearance. The bathroom, her toiletries were gone. Personal items. Small things. This was not an impulsive decision. Elena had packed carefully, thoughtfully, over what must have been days, removing things slowly enough that he had never noticed. She had planned this. She had prepared. She had looked at him across the dinner table, or rather she had eaten dinner alone, and looked at his empty chair, and she had made decisions and executed those decisions, and not once had he seen it coming. Adrian stood in the center of their bedroom and experienced something he could not immediately name. It was not until much later that he would recognize it as the specific shame of a man who believed he was paying attention to everything, discovering he had been paying attention to nothing that actually mattered. Marco arrived in 18 minutes. He walked in without knocking, one of only 3 people in the world allowed to do that, and found Adrian in the kitchen, dressed now, standing at the counter, with 2 cups of coffee already made. Marco was 51, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been battered by time and experience into something people trusted instinctively. He had known Adrian longer than anyone. He had also known Elena for the entire 5 years of the marriage, and that was the thing Adrian could see in Marco's expression right now, not just professional concern, but something more complicated. Marco picked up his coffee. He looked at the wedding ring still sitting on the table. He didn't say anything for a moment. "When did you last actually talk to her?" Marco asked finally. "Not around her, not in the same room. Talk to her." Adrian looked at him. "That's not useful right now, Marco." "I know." Marco wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I'm asking anyway." Adrian didn't answer because the honest answer was worse than silence. Marco nodded slowly, as if the silence was answer enough. "The phone disconnection was planned ahead," Marco said, shifting into the professional mode they both needed. "She didn't just pull a SIM card this morning. A number gets deactivated on a timeline. That means she set this up at least 72 hours ago. Maybe more." "She withdrew from the joint accounts," Adrian said. $14,000 over the last 3 weeks, small amounts each time. Marco looked at him. "You didn't notice?" "No. The withdrawals would have shown on the monthly summary." "I don't read the monthly summary. Dimitri handles that." "And Dimitri didn't flag it?" "No." Marco set his cup down. "Adrian, $14,000 over 3 weeks withdrawn in increments that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts." That's not a woman acting on emotion. That's a woman who researched how to leave. Adrian felt the cold settle into him more deeply. She researched how to leave. She's been planning this for at least a month, probably longer. The weight of that sat between them for a moment. "Find her," Adrian said. "I will." Marco picked up his coffee again. "But I need you to understand something before I do. Elena left this house wanting to not be found. That's different from a woman who left hoping you'd chase her." "I know the difference. Do you—" Adrian met his eyes. "Find her, Marco." Yeah, what Marco's team uncovered over the following 18 hours was both more and less than Adrian expected. Elena Rossi, she had already reverted to her maiden name on the 2 documents they found, had rented a small apartment in a neighborhood called Carver Heights, 40 minutes outside the city. It was a working-class area, nothing glamorous, nothing dangerous. The kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and expected the same in return. She had also applied for a position at a small healthcare administration office 3 weeks prior under her maiden name. The application had been accepted. She had a start date. She had an apartment. She had a plan. All of it put together and executed while she was still sleeping in the same bed as Adrian, still sitting across the table from him at the rare dinners he actually made it home for, still saying, "I'm fine," when he asked on the occasions he remembered to ask how she was doing. Marco delivered this information in person because some things shouldn't live in text messages. Adrian listened without interruption. When Marco finished, he said, "She planned this for months. At least," Marco confirmed. "While living here?" "Yes. While I was here." Marco was quiet for a moment. "Adrian, she wasn't hiding it from you because she was being deceptive. She was hiding it because she didn't believe you'd notice. And she was right." Adrian stood up from the table and walked to the window. He said nothing for a very long time. Marco, who had known him for almost 30 years, let the silence exist without trying to fill it. "I want to go to the apartment," Adrian said finally. "That's not a good idea right now." "I know it's not a good idea. I want to do it anyway." "She asked you not to look for her. She wrote that in a letter before she knew I was going to look for her." "Adrian." "Marco." He turned from the window. His face was composed in that particular way it got when he had decided something and was no longer open to discussion. "Find me the address." He drove himself. That was the first thing that surprised Marco enough to actually argue Adrian Valenti did not go anywhere alone. There were protocols. There were safety considerations. There was a hierarchy of precautions that existed for very good reasons. But Adrian got behind the wheel of a car by himself for the first time in 4 years and drove through the city while the sun was still setting, and Marco stood in the driveway and watched him go because there were 30 years of history between them that made certain arguments pointless. The neighborhood was exactly what the files had described. Quiet streets, older buildings well maintained, a corner store, a laundromat, a small park where a few kids were still playing in the last of the evening light. He found the building. 3rd floor unit, 304. He sat in the car for a long time. The lights in the apartment were on. She was there. In that room, 41 feet above where he was sitting, Elena Rossi was starting her new life. Her carefully planned, deliberately chosen, entirely separate life. And Adrian was sitting in a car outside her building with no idea what to say to her. Adrian Valenti always knew what to say. He was a man who walked into rooms and controlled them. He was a man who negotiated contracts, ended conflicts, and moved through the world with the absolute certainty that he understood how things worked and what was required of him. He did not know what was required of him now. He did not, if he was being completely honest with himself, know who he was when he wasn't the most powerful man in the room. He sat in that car for 45 minutes. Then he started the engine and drove home. He didn't sleep. He sat in his office, the room Elena had once called his real bedroom, the room where he spent more waking hours than any other space in the house, and he read her letter again. "I have made you dinner and waited until midnight 142 times." She had counted. That detail lodged itself in him somewhere painful and refused to move. She had not kept count to build a case against him. That was not Elena's nature. She had kept count because it was the kind of detail she noticed, the kind of woman she was precise observant, a woman who paid attention to things. And the thing she had paid most attention to for 5 years was him. Every time he was late, every time he canceled, every time he promised tomorrow would be different and then let tomorrow become the same as every other day. She had noticed all of it, and he had noticed almost none of her. He pulled out his phone and scrolled back through his text messages with Elena. Further back, further. He was looking for something, and he wasn't sure what. He found it about 8 months ago. A text from Elena on a Tuesday evening. "I made the rosemary chicken you like. Any idea when you'll be home?" His response, 4 hours later. "Late night. Don't wait up. Sorry." Her response immediately. "Okay." Just that. One word. "Okay." He kept scrolling. The pattern was everywhere. Her reaching. His retreating. Her asking. His deflecting. Her accepting. Her accepting. Her accepting. Until she stopped. He put the phone face down on the desk and pressed his palms against his eyes. He had told himself for years that Elena was different from other people in his world, that she was patient and steady, and that she understood his life in a way that others couldn't. He had called it understanding. He had called it strength. He understood now, sitting alone in the office, she had hated that what he had called understanding was actually Elena slowly, quietly breaking. And he had watched it happen without seeing it at all. Marco called at 7 in the morning, with his voice pitched in the careful way that meant bad news was coming. "There's something you need to know," Marco said. "It's not about Elena. It's about why people know she's gone." Adrian went still. "Who knows she's gone?" "The Ferraro family has eyes on the house. Has for the past month. We didn't catch it because they're careful, but our sweep this morning picked up the equipment." A pause. "They know Elena left, and they're looking for her too." The cold that moved through Adrian in that moment was different from the grief of the night before. This was the cold of a man who understood danger with his entire body, who had spent his whole adult life reading threats the way other men read newspapers. "Why?" Adrian's voice was flat, focused. "We're still pulling threads. But the preliminary picture, Adrian, this is bigger than a rival family looking for leverage. Tell me, someone inside our organization has been feeding information to the Ferraros. Not small things. Operational details. Security rotations. Financial structures." Marco paused. "And whoever it is used Elena as a blind spot. They knew you weren't paying attention to her. They moved things through her vicinity meetings, conversations, knowing that you'd never check." Adrian felt the full weight of that land on him. They had used Elena. They had used his neglect of Elena. They had watched him ignore his own wife and turned that negligence into a weapon. "There's more," Marco said. "Say it." "We think Elena noticed something. Not the full scope of it, but enough. Enough that she may have information she doesn't even realize she has. That's why the Ferraros want her. Not for leverage against you, not exactly. They want to know what she saw." Adrian's hand tightened around the phone. "She left to protect herself," he said. "It wasn't a question. We don't know that yet. She left because she didn't feel safe." He heard his own voice say it and felt the sentence hit him somewhere irreversible. She was living in a house where something was wrong, where she had seen or heard something that frightened her, and she didn't tell me because... He stopped. "Because she knew I wasn't paying attention. Because she had learned over 5 years that bringing her fears to him was another form of waiting for him to show up for her, and she had learned what that waiting produced. Nothing. "I need you to pull every person who had access to this house in the last 6 months," Adrian said, and his voice was very quiet now, which was the most dangerous version of his voice. "Every meeting held here, every dinner, every casual visit." "Already in motion," Marco said. "And I need the Ferraro surveillance equipment analyzed. I want to know what they've seen. I want to know how long they've been watching. Yes. And Marco. He paused. I need to talk to Elena. A beat of silence. Adrian, if we reach out to her now and the Ferraros are watching, I know the risk. If they're tracking her apartment, then we go carefully. He stood up from the desk. But she's out there alone, Marco. She left because she didn't feel safe, and she doesn't know that she might have brought something dangerous with her, and she doesn't know that the people who want what she knows have already found where she's living. Marco said nothing for a moment. She has 4 days before her new job starts, Adrian said. 4 days in a place she's never lived before, alone with no protection and an enemy family actively looking for her. That changes things. It does, Marco agreed quietly. This is no longer about our marriage. He said it the way you say something true and painful. She can hate me. She can never come home, but she needs to be safe. A long pause. I'll arrange a careful approach, Marco said. Something that doesn't expose her location to anyone watching you. Good. And Adrian? Marco hesitated, which almost never happened. For what it's worth, what you just said, that was the right thing. Adrian hung up without responding. He stood in the empty office of his empty house and understood fully and clearly for the first time the true accounting of what his choices had cost him. Not the marriage, though, that was enough. Not the years, though those were gone. The worst cost was this. The woman he loved had been afraid, and had been alone in that fear, and had concluded that coming to him was not an option worth trying. He had made himself into someone his own wife couldn't trust with her fear. And now, a woman who had spent 5 years protecting him from his own emotional limitations was out there unprotected in danger she didn't know was coming, because he had spent 5 years teaching her that his attention was not something she could rely on. He picked up his keys. He was done sitting in cars outside her building. He was done choosing the easier thing. Adrian Valenti walked out of his house in the early morning light, got into his car, and began driving toward Carver Heights. Not because he had a plan, not because he knew what to say, but because for the first time in 5 years, he was choosing the one thing that actually mattered. He was choosing her, even if she didn't want him to. Even if she told him to leave, he was showing up, and this time, he wasn't going to let anything, not his pride, not his empire, not the cold weight of everything he'd done wrong, stop him from standing in front of the woman he had failed and finally telling her the truth. He had no idea if it would be enough, but he was done waiting for a better moment. The better moment had been 142 dinners ago, and he had missed every single one of them. He knocked on the door of Unit 304 at 7:41 in the morning. He heard movement inside, small sounds, the kind a person makes when they are going about their morning alone and completely unprepared for a knock at the door. He heard her footsteps cross the floor. He heard them stop. She knew. He didn't know how, but she knew before she even looked through the peephole. He could feel it in the silence that followed the footsteps. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to answer, but the silence of someone who already knew exactly who was standing on the other side and was deciding something far more complicated than whether to open a door. The lock turned. The door opened 4 inches, held by a chain. Elena looked at him through the gap. 5 years of marriage, and he had somehow forgotten the specific way she looked at him when she was holding herself absolutely still. Not anger, not tears. Something worse than both of those things combined. Composure. The kind of composure that a person builds out of the pieces of every emotion they have decided they are no longer going to show you. "You weren't supposed to find me," she said. Her voice was level, steady. It sounded like it had cost her something to make it that way. "I know," Adrian said. "I asked you not to look." "I know that too." She looked at him through the 4-inch gap for a long moment. "Then why are you here?" He had prepared for this. He had spent 40 minutes driving across the city, assembling words, and now that he was standing in front of her, every single one of those words felt like the wrong shape for what he was trying to say. "You're in danger," he said finally. Something shifted in her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. "Close the door, Adrian." "Elena, close the door." Her voice was still level, still steady, but something underneath it had changed. "Go back to your car. Go back to your house. Go back to whatever you were in the middle of when you decided to come here. The Ferraro family is looking for you." The chain stayed where it was. "I know," she said. Adrian stared at her. "You know. I've known for 3 weeks." She said it simply without drama, like she was confirming that it might rain. "That's partially why I left when I did." He could not immediately process the architecture of that sentence. What it meant that she had known, what it meant that she had left with that knowledge, what it meant that she had chosen a small apartment in Carver Heights over coming to him. "You knew someone was watching you, and you didn't tell me," he said. For the first time, something that was not composure moved across her face. "No," she said. "I knew someone was watching the house because of information moving through your organization. I knew something inside your operation was wrong, and I made a decision." "What decision?" "That telling you was not something I was willing to do anymore." The composure came back smooth and final. "Not because I didn't care what happened to you, but because I had spent 5 years trying to talk to you about things that mattered, and I had run out of faith that you were capable of hearing me." The door stayed at 4 inches, 4 inches between them and 5 years of damage. "Let me in, Elena." "No." "Please, no." She said it without flinching. "You don't get to drive across the city and say please like it fixes anything. That's not how this works." "I know it doesn't fix anything." "Then what do you want from me right now?" He looked at her through the gap in the door. This woman who had counted 142 dinners, who had planned her escape while sleeping beside him, who had known about a threat inside his organization, and chosen to handle it alone rather than bring it to him. And he said the only honest thing he had left. "I want you to not be alone with something dangerous while you're angry enough at me to make choices that get you hurt." The silence stretched. "That's very convenient," she said. "The one time you want to be present is when there's a threat." "I know how that sounds." "Do you—" "Elena, please." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed the door. He heard the chain slide free. The door opened. She stepped back without looking at him and walked toward the small kitchen at the far end of the room, and Adrian stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him and understood without being told that being let in was not the same thing as being forgiven. It was simply the next conversation. The one they had needed to have for far longer than either of them had been willing to admit. He stood near the door and looked at her standing at the kitchen counter with her back to him, and he said nothing because he had learned in the last 12 hours that silence was sometimes the only honest response to a room full of things he should have said years ago. "Sit down," she said without turning around. "I'll make coffee." He sat down. She made coffee. And somewhere in that ordinary, terrible domestic moment, Adrian Valenti understood that the distance between where he was sitting and where she was standing was the exact measurement of every choice he had made wrong. He was going to have to earn every inch of it back, if she let him. He wasn't sure she would. He wasn't sure she should. The coffee maker finished. She set a cup in front of him and sat across the table, not beside him, across, and wrapped both hands around her own cup, and looked at him with those careful, composed eyes and said, "Tell me what you know about the Ferraros." Business first, of course. She was protecting herself. He would have done exactly the same thing in her position. "Surveillance equipment on the house," he said. "Been there at least a month. They know you left. Marco's team found the feeds this morning." "What are they looking for?" "Information. Something they believe you saw or heard. Something that came through the house in the last few months." He paused. "Do you know what it is?" Elena looked at her coffee cup for a moment. "Yes," she said. The word landed like a stone, dropped in still water. "Tell me," he said. She looked up. Why should I? The question was not hostile, it was genuine. She was asking him to give her a reason, a real one, not a reflex, not a power play. Why the information she was holding should go to him rather than somewhere else. Adrian had no easy answer for that. Because whatever you saw, it involves my organization, he said carefully. And because people inside my organization may have been using the fact that I wasn't paying attention to you as cover, which makes it partially my responsibility. Partially, she said. Mostly, he corrected. She studied him for a moment. Then she set her cup down. 8 weeks ago, you had a dinner meeting at the house. You do that sometimes, business dinners, associates, I don't know. I usually leave or stay upstairs. I remember. Do you? She said it without sharpness. Just a question. Because there were 4 men at that dinner, and I walked through the dining room once to get something from the hallway table, and one of those men was not who you thought he was. Adrian went very still. What do you mean? I mean, I recognized him. Elena's hands tightened slightly around the cup. Not from your world, from before we were married. I knew him from a different context entirely, my father's business associates years ago. And the name you introduced him by was not his name. Adrian said nothing. He was listening in the specific way he listened, when information was critical, completely without interruption, cataloging every word. I didn't say anything that night, Elena continued. I told myself I was probably wrong. People look like other people. Names change. I had only met this man twice years before, and people change their appearances. She paused. But I kept thinking about it. And about 3 weeks later, I looked through some old files my father kept. I still have boxes of his paperwork from after he passed, and I found what I was looking for. Who is he? Adrian asked. His name is Carmine DeLuca, Elena said. My father knew him 20 years ago as a financial architect, the kind of man who builds structures, shell companies, money paths, false partnerships that are designed to collapse in a controlled way and take someone else down with them. And he was at my dinner table, Adrian said, under a different name. Introduced to you as a property developer from Philadelphia. She met his eyes. That's not what he is, Adrian. He's not working for you. He's working for the people who want what you have. The silence that followed was the kind that filled a room completely. You figured all of this out, Adrian said slowly, and you didn't come to me. No. Why? Elena looked at him steadily. Because I had tried to come to you with smaller things for 5 years. I tried to tell you I was lonely. I tried to tell you I was scared of what your world was doing to us. I tried to tell you about conversations I overheard that didn't feel right, about patterns I noticed, about things that kept me up at night. She paused. And every time you either minimized it, or you were too busy to hear it, or you said you'd deal with it later. So when I found something that actually mattered, something real, something dangerous, I made a decision. You decided not to trust me with it. I decided, she said carefully, that I was not going to keep handing you things and watching you put them in a drawer. So I kept it, and I planned to keep it until I was somewhere safe enough to decide what to do with it. He heard the full shape of that. She had been going to handle it herself, alone, without him, because he had spent 5 years training her that he was not a reliable place to put important things. Elena, he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. I'm sorry. Don't, she said immediately. I need to say it. You can say it, but I need you to understand that sorry is a starting point, not an ending point. Sorry doesn't mean I trust you. Sorry doesn't mean I believe you've changed. Sorry is just the first word in a very long sentence. He nodded. I know. I'm not ready for the rest of the sentence yet. I know that too. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then, something in her shoulders released barely, just slightly, just enough that he could see it, and she stood up and went to get the coffee pot and refilled both their cups, and that small, ordinary gesture felt like the most significant thing that had happened in this room. She sat back down. What are you going to do about DeLuca? Find out everything I can about him before he knows I'm looking, Adrian said. Then dismantle whatever he's built inside the organization before it can be triggered. That's not simple. No, he agreed. But it's necessary. He'll have contingencies. Men like that always have contingencies. If he feels exposed, he'll accelerate whatever he's planning. Adrian looked at her. How do you know that? Elena looked back at him. Because I grew up around men like that. My father's world was full of them. I spent my whole childhood learning how to read the ones who smiled at the table and planned the damage before they left the room. Something rearranged itself in Adrian's understanding of the woman sitting across from him. He had known she grew up in a complicated family. He had always known that, had thought he understood it. But Elena had never fully talked about it, and he had never fully asked. And now he was sitting across from her and realizing she had brought an entire education with her into their marriage, an expertise he had never bothered to access, because it had never occurred to him that his wife might know things worth knowing. What else do you know about how he operates? Adrian asked. Elena paused. You're asking me for help. I'm asking you for information you have. That's the same thing. He met her eyes. Yes, he said. It is. I'm asking you for help. She studied him for a long moment. He could see her weighing something, not just the question on the table, but everything underneath it. Whether this was the same Adrian who would take what she gave and walk away. Whether she was about to hand something valuable to someone who would put it in a drawer. He'll have a secondary contact, Elena said finally. Someone inside your organization who isn't DeLuca. Someone closer to you who feeds DeLuca the operational details he can't access himself. DeLuca can't be the only leak. He's too visible if he tries to get operational data himself. He needs an inside source. Someone I trust, Adrian said. Someone you trust more than you trusted me. She said it without cruelty, just fact. Adrian absorbed that. Who do you think it is? I don't know who, but I know the type. She leaned forward slightly. It's someone who has been with you long enough to know your patterns, long enough that you've stopped questioning their access. Someone who doesn't need to ask for information because the information comes to them naturally. The circle that described was small, very small. I need to go, Adrian said, standing up. Not because he wanted to leave, but because there was something urgent moving in him now, the particular urgency of a man who has just realized that time is working against him. I know, Elena said. He picked up his jacket, paused. Are you going to be here? I live here, she said. I mean, are you going to stay? In the city, I need to know if you're safe. She looked at him. Are you asking me to come back? No, he said. And then, because honesty was the only currency he had left with her, I want to, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you're going to let me make sure you're protected while I deal with what's inside my organization. A long pause. Send someone to watch the building, she said. Someone I don't have to see. I don't want to know they're there. Done. And Adrian. She looked at him across the small distance of the table, and for just a moment the composure slipped enough that he could see what was underneath it. Not anger, not coldness, but the worn-down remains of a love that had been tested past what most people could withstand. A love that was still there, somewhere damaged and cautious, and nowhere near ready to trust the light again. Don't make me regret letting you in. He held her gaze. I won't. He left without touching her, without asking for anything else. He walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the morning air and called Marco before he reached his car. DeLuca, he said. Carmine DeLuca. I want everything on him in 2 hours. Marco went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Where did that name come from? Elena. Another silence. Longer this time. She knew, Marco said. She's been sitting on it for 8 weeks. Adrian opened his car door and stood beside it, looking back at the building without meaning to. And she didn't tell me. Because she didn't think I'd listen. He got into the car. She was right, Marco. That's the part I have to live with. She was completely right. He heard Marco exhale on the other end of the line. I'll have everything on DeLuca in 90 minutes. And Marco, the secondary contact inside the organization. Someone with long-term access. Someone whose information flow is so embedded I've stopped noticing it. Start building that list. That list is going to have names on it that you're not going to like. I know. It might have names that are going to make this complicated. I know that too. Adrian, Marco's voice dropped. We've been at this a long time together. Whatever name comes up, we handle it. Okay? Whatever it is. Whatever it is, Adrian confirmed. He started the car and pulled away from the curb, and he did not let himself look up at the window of the third-floor apartment where Elena was probably standing watching him leave, and calculating whether she had made a mistake by opening the door. He hoped she hadn't. He was going to spend whatever time he had making sure she hadn't. The information Marco's team assembled on Carmine DeLuca in the following 90 minutes was enough to make Adrian's blood run cold, in a way that almost nothing managed to do anymore. DeLuca was not a freelance operator. He was a carefully constructed identity, a person who existed on paper with a history that could survive initial scrutiny, built over a period of not months but years. The real name attached to the face was Vincenzo Ferro, a former financial operative who had dropped out of traceable existence approximately 7 years ago after being connected to 3 separate corporate collapses that had destroyed legitimate businesses while moving significant assets to undisclosed locations. He was a specialist in controlled demolition, not buildings, empires. He found organizations with internal tension, families, companies, networks built on loyalty and trust, and he inserted himself, quietly, built relationships, waited, and then applied precisely calculated pressure to the exact points he'd identified as weak. He had done this successfully 4 times that Marco's researchers could confirm. The Valenti organization would have been the 5th. He's been inside for 11 months, Marco said. They were in the office now. Door closed. 3 other men Adrian trusted completely arranged around the room with their phones face down on their laps. 11 months of building the Philadelphia property developer identity, attending industry events, making himself known through legitimate channels before anyone introduced him to you. Who introduced him? Adrian asked. Marco looked at the papers in front of him for a beat longer than necessary. That's where we get to the part of the conversation I told you wouldn't like. The room went very quiet. Say it, Adrian said. The introduction came through Giannetti. Marco put the name on the table carefully, the way you put something fragile down. Sal Giannetti introduced DeLuca Ferro at a business association dinner 8 months ago, vouched for him personally. Sal Giannetti. Salvador Giannetti, who had been with Adrian's organization for 14 years, who was the head of his financial operations division, who sat 3 seats to Adrian's right at every formal meeting and had access to every major financial structure the Valenti name was attached to, who had been at that dinner 8 weeks ago, who had been in the room with Elena. Sal, said one of the men in the room, Danny Ricci, who had known Giannetti for 12 years, in a voice that was more breath than word. We don't know the full scope yet, Marco said, but the introduction is confirmed. And the financial irregularities we've been finding over the last 2 hours, the patterns the movement they trace back to, accounts that Giannetti has authority over. How much has moved? Adrian asked. Enough, Marco said. And more importantly, it's structured in a way that if triggered implicates you. Not Giannetti, not DeLuca. You. He paused. Whoever built this built it to make it look like you were the architect, like you were moving money in ways that would bring federal attention. The kind of attention that ends empires. Adrian sat back in his chair. The design of it was elegant in the particular terrible way that well-planned destruction is elegant. 11 months of patience. Build the trust. Embed the mechanism. Wait for the right moment to trigger it. Walk away while someone else burned. They used Elena as a blind spot, Adrian said. They counted on you being distracted by the state of your marriage. Marco said it simply without judgment. They were watching long enough to understand that Elena wasn't in your operational world, that she was outside the circle, that you didn't include her, and they used that gap. Adrian thought about Elena sitting across the table from him that morning, both hands around her coffee cup, saying, "Someone you trust more than you trusted me." She hadn't known the full architecture of what was happening, but she had known the shape of it, the sense that something was wrong, moving through her house, using the spaces Adrian had left empty by always choosing to be somewhere else. She had tried in her own way to protect him, and she had done it alone, because he had never given her a reason to believe he would listen. "Where is Giannetti now?" Adrian asked. "His phone is active. He's at the financial office on Meridian. Hasn't been told anything. He doesn't know we've been looking." Marco paused. "How do you want to handle it?" Adrian looked at the table for a moment. "Carefully," he said. "We don't move on Giannetti until we have the complete picture. If we tip our hand before we understand every piece of this pharaoh, DeLuca accelerates whatever he's been building. We need to know the full scope before we dismantle it." "Agreed," Marco said. "But Adrian, there's a time problem. Tell me, the structure Giannetti built has a trigger mechanism. We found it in the financial architecture this morning. It's designed to activate automatically if certain conditions are met, specifically if Giannetti stops checking in through a specific process every 72 hours. Dead man switch design. If Giannetti is removed from the equation before we can disarm the mechanism, it triggers automatically. So we can't touch Giannetti until we find the disarm," Adrian said. "Correct. And we don't know how long we have before something else, something external, tips Giannetti that we're looking." The room felt smaller. "How long do we need to find the disarm mechanism?" Adrian asked. "Best case 24 hours. Worst case longer than we may have." Adrian stood up. He walked to the window, not to look out. Just to move. Just to do something with the energy in his body that needed somewhere to go. His mind was running fast and clean now, the way it ran when the threat was real, and the timeline was tight, and everything else fell away, except the problem in front of him. But underneath the strategy, underneath the calculation, there was something else running now too. Something that hadn't been there a year ago, 6 months ago, even a week ago. Elena's face across the table. The 4-inch gap of the door chain. "Don't make me regret letting you in." "Start on the disarm," he said, turning back to the room. "I want the full financial picture, every account Giannetti has touched in the last year. Every structure, every signature. And I want someone watching DeLuca without DeLuca knowing he's being watched." "On it," Marco said. "And I want a team on Elena's building." He looked at Marco directly. "Invisible. She doesn't see them. But nobody gets close to that building without us knowing." "Already arranged," Marco said. "Made the call when you told me she knew about DeLuca. If she identified him, he might already know she can identify him." The implications settled in the room like smoke. DeLuca Faro had been at that dinner. He had been in the same room as Elena. He had been introduced to her casually, as any dinner guest might be. And Elena had looked at his face and recognized something that didn't match the name she'd been given. If he had seen that recognition in her eyes, if he was as careful and as experienced as the files suggested he was, he would have noted it. He would have filed it away. He would have been watching her since that evening. He would know she had left the house. He might already be 3 steps ahead of where they thought he was. "How visible is Elena's departure to the Ferraro network?" Adrian asked. "Visible enough," Marco said. "She left cleanly, but a woman who has been under surveillance for a month doesn't disappear without the people watching noting the disappearance. So they know she's gone. They know she's gone. And if Faro communicated to the Ferraro family that Elena might be a liability, that she might have recognized him, then they're not just looking for leverage anymore." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Adrian felt the weight of every decision he had made and failed to make in the last 5 years press down on him in one concentrated moment. Not as guilt, he didn't have time for guilt, but as information. As the full understanding of what his neglect had produced, not just for his marriage, not just for his own heart, but for the safety of a woman who had deserved better from him every single day and had tried to protect herself because he had never adequately protected her. "Get me a secure line to the apartment," he said. "I need to talk to Elena. Now." He called her from the secure line 2 minutes later. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was steady. Of course it was. "Something's changed," he said, and he didn't soften it because she didn't deserve to be managed. "The situation is more serious than I told you this morning. I didn't have the full picture when I came to you. I do now." A beat of silence. "Tell me." So he told her. Not everything. Not the mechanisms and the financial architecture and the specific names that were currently being mapped out in the room behind him, but the essential shape of it. The threat was real. The man she had recognized at the dinner table was more dangerous than either of them had understood that morning. The people looking for her were not simply gathering leverage. She listened without interrupting. That was Elena. She listened the way she did everything completely without noise. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I want to move her," Adrian said. "Somewhere secure. Somewhere that isn't associated with my name, but that has protection I trust." "She's going to say no," Marco said quietly from across the room. He was right. "No," Elena said. "Elena, I am not going to a safe house, or a secured location, or wherever it is you're thinking of putting me." Her voice was steady and absolute. "I understand the threat. I've understood the threat for longer than you have, but I'm not going to trade one kind of captivity for another." "This isn't captivity. This is protection." "The last 5 years were also framed as protection," she said. "The car service, the security at events, the way my whole life was managed around what was safe for you and your reputation. I understand that you mean it differently, but I need you to understand that the answer is no." He breathed in. He breathed out. "Then what do you need?" Another pause, shorter this time, like the question surprised her slightly. "I need to know the man's face who came to your dinner," she said. "The real file. I need to know what he looks like now versus what he looked like when I knew him 20 years ago. I need to know if there are other people connected to him who I might have met." "Why?" "Because I might know more than I realize I know," she said. "And because if I'm going to be in the middle of this, whether I chose to be or not, I'd rather be useful than just a problem you're trying to secure." He stood with the phone in his hand and the whole impossible weight of her in his chest. "I'll send Marco," he said. "Not Marco," she said. "You." He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Okay," he said. "Me." He hung up the phone and looked at Marco across the room. "She wants to help," Marco said. It wasn't a question. "She's been helping since 8 weeks ago," Adrian said. "We just didn't know it." He picked up his jacket. "Hold everything here. Keep building the picture. I'll be back in 2 hours. "Adrian." Marco stopped him at the door. "Whatever you're feeling right now about her, about the marriage, about all of it, keep it separate from the operation. You can't afford to make decisions based on emotion right now." Adrian looked at him. "The problem," he said, "is that making decisions without emotion is exactly what got us here." He left before Marco could answer. And for the second time that morning, Adrian Valenti drove toward Carver Heights, but this time it wasn't to protect her from a danger she didn't know about. It was because she had asked him to come. That difference, small, enormous, irreversible, lived somewhere in the center of his chest the whole drive across the city. She had asked him to come, and he was coming. Not because she needed him to, but because for the first time in 5 years, she had decided he might be worth asking. He was not going to waste that. Not this time. Not again. He was back at her door by 11:15. She opened it without the chain this time. That small thing. The absence of the chain. The door swinging open fully, instead of 4 cautious inches, landed somewhere in Adrian's chest without permission. He didn't comment on it. He stepped inside, set the file folder Marco had assembled on her kitchen table, and sat down in the same chair he'd sat in that morning. Elena sat across from him. Same position, both hands around a fresh cup of coffee like the cup was keeping her grounded. She looked at the folder. "Is that him?" "Everything we have," Adrian said. "Real name, real history, the network he's connected to, and photographs going back 12 years. She reached out and opened the folder. He watched her face as she went through it page by page, photograph by photograph, and what he saw was not the reaction of a woman encountering new information. It was the reaction of a woman confirming what she had already suspected, and finding it even worse than she'd calculated. "Vincenzo Ferro," she said, reading the name off the second page. "You knew that name." "My father mentioned it once." She turned another page. "I was 17. I didn't understand the context at the time. My father said there was a man named Ferro who built traps for other people to fall into, and that the worst thing about him was that he was patient enough to wait years for the trap to close." She looked up. "I didn't know that was the same man until right now." Adrian absorbed that. "Your father knew about him." "My father knew about a lot of things." Elena's voice was careful in the way it got when she was navigating old pain. "He spent 20 years in a world adjacent to yours, Adrian. Not the same, but adjacent. And he spent the last 5 years of his life trying to get out of it." She paused. "He never fully made it out." The silence between them held that for a moment. "There's something else in the file," Adrian said. "Third section. I need you to look at it and tell me if you recognize any of the names or faces." She turned to the third section. He watched her read. He watched her stop. He watched her go very still in the way that people go still when something they are reading is reconfiguring something they believe to be true. "This man," she said. Her finger rested on a photograph. "He was at your dinner, too." Adrian leaned forward. "Which one?" She turned the folder so he could see. Her finger was on a face he recognized, a face that made his stomach drop in a way he had not expected, because this was not a name from the file Marco had assembled on DeLuca's network. This was a face Adrian knew personally, not from business, from family. "That's Renzo," Adrian said. The name came out flat. "Renzo Marchetti. He's my cousin's husband." Elena looked at him steadily. "I know who he is. He was seated 2 chairs away from you at the dinner. I remember because I thought it was strange that he was there. He's never been part of your operational circle." "He's not," Adrian said. "He came because my cousin asked me to include him. She said he was looking to move into real estate investment and wanted to make connections." He heard himself say it and heard simultaneously how clean and obvious it was, the simplest kind of introduction, the kind nobody questions, because it comes wrapped in family. "He was talking to DeLuca to Ferro for almost 40 minutes, Elena said. "I saw them from the hallway. Ferro was doing most of the listening, but it wasn't the listening of someone meeting a person for the first time. They knew each other before that dinner." "It looked that way to me, yes." Adrian stood up, not in anger, in the specific kinetic restlessness of a man whose understanding of a situation has just shifted significantly, and whose body needs to process that shift before his mind can catch up. Renzo Marchetti, his cousin Lucia's husband of 7 years, a man who had been present at family dinners, at celebrations, at the ordinary intimate gatherings, where information flowed freely because everyone present was supposed to be trusted. "I need to make a call," Adrian said. "I know," Elena said. He stepped away from the table and called Marco. "Renzo Marchetti," he said when Marco answered. "Pull everything." A pause. "Adrian, Lucia's husband. Pull everything, Marco, now." "Already on it," Marco said, and Adrian could hear in his voice that this name was not entirely surprising to him either, which meant Marco had already been thinking about it and had been waiting for Adrian to get there himself. "Give me 20 minutes. He hung up and turned back to the table. Elena was still looking at the folder, but her eyes weren't moving across the page anymore. She was thinking. He could see the shape of it, the particular stillness of someone sorting through memories, pulling out moments that hadn't seemed significant at the time, and holding them up to new light. "What are you remembering?" he asked. She looked up. The fact that he'd read her correctly, that he'd noticed she was somewhere else inside her own head, registered briefly in her expression. "Last Christmas," she said. "Renzo was at the family dinner. He spent most of the evening asking me about the house. Not about you, about me. What I did with my time, what my routines were, whether I went out much." She paused. "I thought he was just making conversation. I thought he was one of those men who talks to the wives because he doesn't know what to say to the husbands." "He was mapping your routine," Adrian said. "Yes." She closed the folder. "I think he was." The word hit him somewhere that had nothing to do with strategy. A man had sat at his family Christmas dinner and cataloged his wife's daily movements. Had used the warmth and trust of a family holiday as cover for intelligence gathering. Had smiled and passed the bread basket and asked Elena about her afternoons while building a picture of her schedule that could be used later as a weapon. And Adrian had been across the room talking about sports with his uncles. "Elena," he said. His voice came out different than he intended, lower. "I need you to think carefully. In the last 6 months, have there been any other moments where someone from my world, from family gatherings, from anywhere near our circle, asked you questions that feel different now than they felt then?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down." He sat. "Yes," she said, "multiple times. And I want you to understand something before I tell you, Adrian. I want you to understand that I tried to tell you about some of these moments. Not all of them. Some of them I didn't fully process until later. But some of them I brought to you." He held her eyes. "I didn't listen. You said I was being too sensitive. You said I was seeing problems in places where there weren't any. You said your people were loyal." She said it without accusation, just the bare architecture of what had happened. "So I stopped mentioning it." The thing in his chest tightened. "Tell me now," he said. "Everything you remember. All of it." And she did. She talked for 45 minutes. Adrian did not interrupt her once. She told him about the woman, a wife of one of his associates, who had spent an entire dinner party asking Elena about the security arrangements at the house, framed as admiring curiosity about how safe the neighborhood was. She told him about a phone call she'd overheard through an open study door, a call she'd assumed at the time was standard business, that she now understood contained a specific financial reference that didn't fit the legitimate business it was supposed to describe. She told him about a pattern she'd noticed in the timing of certain visits to the house, visitors who arrived when Adrian was away, who spoke with staff members who stayed longer than their stated purpose required. She had been paying attention to all of it. She had been watching his world with careful, intelligent eyes for 5 years, noticing things that the people inside the organization missed because those people were too close to see clearly, and because nobody had thought to ask her. Nobody had asked her. Because nobody had thought to. Because Adrian himself had never thought to. When she finished, he sat with it for a long moment. "You've been watching all of this," he said finally. "I grew up learning to watch," she said simply. "My father's world required it. You knew that. You just never connected it to anything useful." He looked at her across the table and had the full, clear, irreversible understanding that he had spent 5 years married to someone with significant intelligence and experience and insight, and had spent those same 5 years treating her as a person who needed to be kept comfortable and separate from his world, rather than a person who might have had something to contribute to it. He had kept her outside the circle, not to protect her. He had kept her outside the circle because including her would have required seeing her as an equal, and he had been too locked in his own sense of control to manage that. It was the most personally damning thing he had understood about himself in 39 years. His phone rang. Marco. He answered immediately. "Tell me." "Renzo Marchetti," Marco said, and his voice was carrying the weight of something substantial. 14 years ago, before he married Lucia, he was connected to a financial consulting firm in Milan that was later found to be a front operation. The firm dissolved before charges were filed. He was not named directly, but 3 of his close colleagues were. A pause. The firm had ties to a network that we've just confirmed had prior associations with Vincenzo Ferro. The room was very quiet. He married Lucia 14 years ago, Adrian said, 11 months after the firm dissolved. Adrian did the math. 11 months. Enough time to establish a clean identity. Enough time to be introduced into a new circle through a family connection that nobody would think to question. He's been inside for 14 years, Adrian said. Not actively the entire time, Marco said. We think he was dormant for most of it, waiting, building genuine relationships with Lucia, with the family, with you, so that when he was activated, the trust was real and deep and had years behind it. A pause. Adrian, this is not something that was built in response to a recent threat. This has been constructed over more than a decade. Someone invested 14 years into this operation. Adrian felt the scale of it settle over him. 14 years. Renzo had married his cousin. Not he had to face the possibility squarely necessarily because he loved her, but because marrying into the family gave him access that no outside operative could purchase. Does Lucia know? He asked. We don't believe so. Marco's voice was careful. But we can't be certain yet. Be certain before anyone approaches her, Adrian said. She's family. She gets handled correctly. Understood. There's more. Marco paused. The Ferro de Luca financial structure we've been mapping. The trigger mechanism in the dead man's switch. We found the framework of it. Adrian, it's not designed to just implicate you financially. It's designed to generate information that would go directly to federal investigators. Organized Crime Division. The file is pre-built. It has your signatures on documents you signed, legitimately signed, but embedded in a context that makes them look like knowing participation in specific criminal enterprises. He framed me over 11 months, Adrian said. Renzo fed him my signature patterns, my document protocols. Yes, and Giannetti processed the financial structures in ways that look on paper like you designed them. You didn't. But proving you didn't without the disarm mechanism would take years and cost you everything in the meantime. Adrian looked at Elena across the table. She was listening. She had heard enough to understand the shape of what Marco was describing, even without the specific details. How long before the dead man's switch triggers if Giannetti is removed from the equation? Adrian asked. 72 hours from his last check-in, Marco said. His last confirmed check-in was approximately 14 hours ago, which means we have approximately 58 hours. Yes, and we still don't have the disarm. We're close, Marco said. But close is not there yet. Keep working. I'll be back within the hour. He hung up. Elena was looking at him steadily. 58 hours, she said. You heard. I heard enough. She set her cup down. What are you going to do? Find the disarm before the clock runs out, he said, and then dismantle every piece of this from the foundation up. And Giannetti, Renzo. Giannetti stays untouched until the disarm is found. Renzo. He stopped, because Renzo was not just an operative. Renzo was Lucia's husband. Lucia, who had been married to him for 14 years, who had built a life around a man who had chosen her strategically. Renzo is a problem I have to solve very carefully. Elena was quiet for a moment. Your cousin is going to be devastated. I know. She loves him. I know that too. He said it with the weight it deserved. And she's going to find out he chose her because of me, because of access to my family. She's going to have to rebuild her entire understanding of her own marriage. He paused. I understand what that feels like now. Elena looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but acknowledging, recognizing what he'd meant. Adrian, I'm not comparing what's happened to us to what happened to Lucia, he said quickly. That's not what I meant. I only meant I understand in a way I didn't before this week what it means to discover that a relationship you built was constructed on something other than what you believed. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't choose me strategically. No, he said. I chose you completely. I just didn't know how to keep choosing you after the choosing was done." The words sat between them. He hadn't planned to say that. It wasn't strategy, it was the specific kind of honesty that comes out when a person is tired enough and shaken enough that the careful management of their own emotions stops working. Elena looked at the table for a moment. When she looked back up, her eyes were careful and tired, and something else he couldn't fully name. "Go," she said. "Handle what needs handling. I'll have a team on the building." "You said that already. I'm saying it again." She almost smiled. Almost. "I noticed." He stood and picked up his jacket and made it to the door before he turned back around because there was one more thing. One thing he had been carrying since the kitchen table that morning when Marco had first said the name DeLuca, and the full scope of it had started to unfold. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. "You told me 8 weeks ago you left. 8 weeks ago, and in those 8 weeks, while you were here alone planning a new life working all of this out by yourself." He stopped. "Were you afraid?" She held his gaze. "Yes," she said simply. "Every day. Most days." "And you didn't call anyone?" "I called my friend Sophie twice." A pause. "And I cried in the shower more than I'm going to tell you about." He stood in the doorway of her apartment and felt the full weight of that Elena alone in a place she'd never lived, carrying information about a dangerous man, building a new life from scratch, afraid, and not calling him because calling him was not something she had learned to trust. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not as a starting point, not as a word that fixes things. I'm sorry because you were afraid and alone, and you didn't have anyone to call because I had spent 5 years becoming someone who wasn't worth calling." Her eyes were very bright for a moment. She didn't look away. "Go," she said softly. "Come back when it's over." He left. 3 floors down, out into the air, phone already in his hand, Adrian Valenti walked to his car and made 4 calls in rapid succession. Marco, then 2 operational leads, then a security coordinator, and by the time he was behind the wheel, the next phase of what needed to happen was already in motion. But the thing he carried with him out of that apartment was not the 58-hour clock or the dead man's switch or the carefully constructed trap that had been 14 years in the making. It was 3 words. Come back when. Not if. When. He drove back through the city with that word sitting in his chest like a coal, warm and painful and absolutely alive. When. The next 6 hours were the kind of hours that Adrian Valenti had spent his entire adult life training for. The kind where everything moved at once, and the margin for error was 0, and the only way through was to be faster and smarter and more thorough than everyone working against you. Marco's team had assembled a complete financial map of everything Giannetti had touched in the last 14 months. 3 analysts working simultaneously had identified 17 distinct structural elements in the trap points, where legitimate documents had been embedded in illegitimate frameworks, where Adrian's real decisions had been recontextualized into something that looked at a surface review like deliberate criminal architecture. The disarm mechanism, when they finally located it at just past 4 in the afternoon, was not where any of them had expected to find it. It was not in the financial systems. It was in a physical location, a safety deposit box registered to a shell company in a bank 3 blocks from Giannetti's office on Meridian. The box contained a drive with the master key to the entire structure, the authentic documentation of how the trap had been built, the real paper trail that showed the manipulation rather than the fabricated one that implicated Adrian. He kept insurance, Marco said. Giannetti kept insurance against Pharaoh, against everyone. In case things went wrong and he needed to be able to prove he was following orders rather than originating them. He documented his own betrayal, Adrian said. He documented enough to save himself. Which means he documented enough to save us too, if we can get to it before the clock runs out. Marco paused. We need the box. We need access. What's the timeline? The bank closes in 40 minutes. Can we get legitimate access in 40 minutes? No, we cannot. Marco said it plainly. But we can get other kinds of access. Adrian looked at him. How clean? Clean enough. We have a contact at that branch. It's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be something we discuss in detail, but it gets us in the box tonight. Do it, Adrian said. Marco was already on the phone. The 40 minutes that followed were the kind of waiting that Adrian had learned over 2 decades to do without showing. He sat at the desk in his office, not reading the papers in front of him, not looking at his phone, just sitting with the particular discipline of a man who understands that some things cannot be rushed, and that the only productive thing he can do with the time is remain calm enough to think clearly when the moment comes. His phone rang at 4:52. "We have it," Marco said. Adrian released a breath he'd been holding for most of the afternoon. "The drive is intact." "The drive is intact. We're having it analyzed now. First read looks like exactly what we needed, the full documentation of how the structure was built by whom and on whose orders." A pause. "Adrian, the orders didn't come from Pharaoh." He went still. "Who?" "Pharaoh was an architect. He designed it. But the person who commissioned the design, the person who identified your organization as the target, who authorized 14 years of patient construction, who funded Renzo Marchetti's entire introduction into your family." "Marco, who?" "Dominic Ferraro," Marco said. "Senior, not the current head of the family, his father, who died 3 years ago." A pause. "He started this 20 years ago, Adrian. He started it when you were 19 years old, and your father was still running the organization, and Dominic Ferraro had decided that the Valenti name was a problem he wanted to solve on a long timeline. 20 years. The number hung in the air. He didn't live to see it finished," Adrian said. "No. But his son inherited the operation along with everything else. It became a legacy project, something to honor the father by completing." Marco's voice was careful. "And the current Ferraro leadership has been managing it for the 3 years since Dominic Sr. died. Managing it and accelerating the timeline because they want it resolved." Adrian sat in his chair and felt the architectural depth of what had been built around his family, like a 20-year prison that nobody had known existed. Dominic Ferraro Sr. had looked at a 19-year-old Adrian Valenti and decided to build a trap designed to close 20 years later. He had embedded a man in the family through marriage. He had waited. He had died waiting. And now the next generation was trying to close the trap on schedule. "How close were they?" Adrian asked. 90 days, according to the documentation. They were planning to trigger the mechanism in approximately 90 days. Your marriage failing. Marco stopped. Elena leaving. That accelerated things. They saw instability. They thought it was an opportunity to move faster. And Elena had seen it coming. Elena, who had grown up learning to read men who smiled at tables while planning the damage, who had recognized a face that didn't match a name, who had spent 8 weeks alone managing fear and information and a plan for her own survival. Elena had seen the instability that the Ferraro network had tried to exploit, and she had moved first. She had not moved first to protect Adrian. She had moved first to protect herself. But in doing so, she had inadvertently disrupted their timeline. Her departure had shaken loose exactly enough to make Marco's team look more carefully. Her recognition of Pharaoh had given Adrian the name. Her memory of Renzo at the Christmas dinner had closed the circle on the inside source. The woman they had treated as a blind spot had turned out to be the clearest pair of eyes in the entire operation. "I need to talk to Giannetti," Adrian said. "Tonight, before he checks in on the mechanism and realizes something has changed. Are you sure that's the right move?" "He kept insurance," Adrian said. "Which means he's afraid. A man who's afraid of the people he's working with is a man who can be offered an alternative." He paused. "He's not the architect. He's not the original problem. He's a man who got in deep and saw no way out. I want to give him a way out. In exchange for everything he has on the Ferraro operation," Marco said. "In exchange for everything he has," Adrian confirmed. "We already have the drive, but Giannetti has 17 months of direct operational knowledge. That's worth more than a clean exit from a dead man's switch." Marco was quiet for a moment. "When you walk into that room with Giannetti, and he realizes, you know he's going to be terrified." "Good," Adrian said. Terrified people make honest decisions. He stood up. He checked his watch. Set up the meeting. Neutral location. Tonight. And Renzo? Marco asked. The name landed differently than it had that morning. Now it carried the full weight of Lucia, of her 14 years, of her children, of every family Christmas, where Adrian had shaken Renzo Marchetti's hand and felt nothing but ordinary family affection. Renzo waits until after Giannetti, Adrian said. Renzo is more complicated. Because of Lucia. Because of Lucia. He picked up his jacket. And because I'm not going to handle that situation in anger. I'm going to handle it correctly. She deserves that much. He was halfway to the door when his phone buzzed. Not a call, a text, from an unknown number that Marco's system immediately flagged as active, not a threat, but live. He opened it. He knows you have the drive, someone told him. Get Elena out of the apartment, now. No name. No context. Just those two sentences, and the specific cold that moves through a person's body when a threat that has been theoretical becomes immediate. He called Elena's number before he finished reading the second sentence. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. She picked up on the 4th, and the sound in the background was wrong. Too much quiet, the specific quality of a person who has realized that the silence around them has changed. Elena, he said, and his voice was controlled and direct because this was not the time for anything else. I need you to leave the apartment right now. Take your phone, your keys, and nothing else. Walk down the stairs, not the elevator, and go out the back entrance of the building. A beat. Adrian. Right now, Elena. I have someone 2 blocks away. They will meet you at the back of the building. His name is Torres. Dark jacket, gray car. Say the word steady when you see him, and he'll respond with the word anchor. That's how you know it's him. Another beat. Shorter. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. The same word she had said at the end of 100 text messages when she was still trying to be someone he'd show up for. But different now, not resignation. Action. She was already moving. He could hear her footsteps. Stay on the line with me, he said. I'm at the door, she said. Take the stairs on the left. They come out by the maintenance hallway. I know my own building, Adrian. Even now. Even running. That was Elena. He was already in his car. First floor, she said. Keep moving. Maintenance hallway. Almost there. He heard the door, heard her breathing change slightly with the cold air, heard footsteps on concrete. Then he heard her say quietly and steadily, steady. And Torres's voice low and immediate. Anchor. I have him, Elena said into the phone. Get in the car, Adrian said. I'm 12 minutes away. He drove those 12 minutes with everything else falling away. Not the Ferraro timeline. Not Giannetti's meeting. Not the 58-hour clock, which was now closer to 40 hours. Not the 20-year operation designed to destroy his family. Just the 12 minutes between where he was and where she was. Just Elena. He pulled up behind Torres' gray car at 12 minutes and 14 seconds. He got out. She was already stepping out of the passenger side before he reached her, and she walked toward him with her keys in her hand and her phone in her pocket. And the specific composure of a woman who has been frightened and managed it alone, and is now deciding what to do with the fact that the person who came for her is the same person who was supposed to have been there all along. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her. Are you hurt? He said. No. Are you okay? I will be. She looked at him steadily. Who sent you the warning? I don't know yet. Someone inside their network. Or someone playing both sides, he said. Either way, they saved you time. We're going to figure out who they are. He paused. I'm taking you somewhere safe. Not a safe house, somewhere you choose. Tell me where you want to go, and that's where we'll go. She looked at him for a long moment. The night air was cold. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She was wearing the practical clothes she had packed when she left the warm layers, the shoes that chose comfort over appearance. And she looked standing in an alley while everything came apart and came together simultaneously, like the most real version of herself he had ever seen. "Sophie's," she said. "My friend Sophie, in Brooklyn. I want to go there." "Done," he said. "Will it be safe for her?" "I'll have the building covered. She won't know it, but yes." Elena nodded, started toward his car, stopped, turned back. "Adrian." He looked at her. "When this is over," she said, carefully choosing each word, "I am not going to pretend that the last 5 years didn't happen. I'm not going to go back to what we were just because you showed up in time and did the right thing under pressure." "I know," he said. "Doing the right thing in a crisis is not the same as being the right person every day." "I know that. So don't—" She stopped. Something moved in her face. "Don't let tonight be the thing you point to. Don't let coming to get me be the story you tell yourself about who you are now." He held her eyes. "The only story I'm telling myself right now," he said, "is that I have 40 hours to dismantle 20 years of damage, and that the woman who helped me understand what I was actually dealing with is going to be somewhere safe while I do it." He paused. "Everything else comes after, if you'll let it." She looked at him for one long, still moment. Then she turned and got into the car. He got behind the wheel. He drove. And for the first time since he had walked into that silent house and found a wedding ring on the kitchen table, Adrian Valenti was moving towards something instead of away from it. He didn't know yet if it would be enough. But he was done calculating the odds. Some things you do because they are right, not because you are certain they will work. Elena was right. Showing up in a crisis was not the measure of a man. The measure was everything that came after. He was going to have to prove that. Starting tonight. Starting now. Sophie Marchetti opened her apartment door at 8:47 in the evening, took one look at Elena standing in the hallway, and pulled her inside without asking a single question. That was the thing about real friends. They didn't need context to know when context could wait. Adrian stood in the hallway outside Sophie's door for a moment after it closed, listening to the muffled sound of Sophie's voice. Not the words, just the tone, warm and immediate, and completely focused on Elena. And he felt something he hadn't expected to feel, standing in a Brooklyn hallway, while his organization was 40 hours from potential destruction. Relief. Not the strategic kind, not the operational kind. The specific relief of knowing that the person you failed to protect adequately had, despite everything, managed to build a life with people who would catch her. Sophie had clearly been catching Elena for years. Probably, if he was being honest, during the years when he should have been doing it himself and wasn't. He called Marco. "Building is covered," Marco confirmed before Adrian could ask. "4 on rotation. Nobody gets to that floor without us knowing." "Good. What's the status on the Gianetti meeting?" "Set for 10 o'clock. Neutral location, the old Carver Street office. It's clean, it's swept, and it's not connected to your name directly." "Who else knows about the meeting?" "You, me, and Danny Ricci. That's it. Keep it that way." Adrian started walking toward the elevator. "What about Pharaoh? Has he moved?" His last confirmed location was the hotel on Meridian, where he's been staying under the DeLuca identity. "He hasn't checked out. But Adrian—" Marco paused. "He went dark 2 hours ago. Phone off, no movement on his surveillance, nothing. He's been told something. That's our assessment. The warning text you received, whoever sent it, was telling us that Pharaoh had been informed we have the drive. Which means Pharaoh knows his mechanism is compromised and he's calculating his next move. He'll try to accelerate the trigger," Adrian said. "He won't wait for the dead man's switch. If he thinks we have the disarm documentation, he'll look for another way to deploy what he's built." "That's our concern too," Marco said. "We're trying to locate all secondary trigger points, any other mechanism that could activate the federal file without going through Gianetti's check-in." "Find them all," Adrian said. "Everyone, tonight. Working on it." A pause. "Adrian, there's one more thing." The way Marco said it, the specific weight of a man about to deliver information he wishes he didn't have, made Adrian stop walking. "Say it," The warning text. We traced the number as far as we could. It bounced through 3 different relay points, which is sophisticated enough that whoever sent it knew what they were doing. Marco stopped. The final relay point before it hit your phone came from inside the Ferraro network, not from an outsider looking in, from someone with direct access to their internal communications. Adrian processed that. Someone inside the Ferraro organization warned me. Someone inside the Ferraro organization warned you specifically about Elena being in danger, Marco said. Not about the drive, not about the trigger mechanism, about Elena, which means whoever sent it has a specific interest in her safety. The implications of that were several, and none of them were simple. Find out who it is, Adrian said. I'm trying. But Adrian, if it's who I think it might be, this gets significantly more complicated before it gets simpler. Marco, I think it might be Carla Ferraro, Marco said, Dominic Jr.'s wife. Adrian stood in the hallway of a Brooklyn apartment building and let that name rearrange his understanding of the evening. Carla Ferraro, married to the current head of the Ferraro family for 11 years. Known publicly as a quiet background presence, the kind of woman that powerful men's wives were supposed to be unobtrusive and decorative and peripheral to anything that actually mattered. The same description he realized with a cold and specific clarity that anyone in his world would have applied to Elena. Why would Carla Ferraro warn me about Elena? He asked. I don't know yet, Marco said. But I have a theory, and my theory is that Carla Ferraro has been watching what her husband's organization has been doing to your marriage for long enough that she recognized what she was looking at. And that maybe she didn't want to watch it finish the way it was supposed to finish. Adrian said nothing. Women in our world watch a lot, Marco said quietly. And they talk to each other less than we assume and more than we know. Set up a way to reach Carla Ferraro, Adrian said, quietly, in a way that doesn't put her at risk. If Dominic finds out she contacted you, I know what happens. Set it up carefully. He started walking again. I'll be at the Carver Street office by 9:45. He arrived at 9:38 because he didn't know how to be late for things that mattered. The office was a space from an earlier era of the organization, a place that had been used for certain kinds of meetings when Adrian's father was still alive and the operation was structured differently. It had been maintained out of habit and a vague sense that some things should be preserved, and walking into it now felt like walking into a room that held the ghost of every difficult conversation that had ever happened in it. He sat at the single table in the center of the room, Marco on his left, Danny Ricci by the door, and he waited. Salvatore Giannetti arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. He was 63 years old, thick through the chest and shoulders, with gray hair cut close, and hands that had spent 40 years working with numbers in ways both legal and otherwise. He had been with the Valenti organization for 14 of those years. He had sat at Adrian's table, attended his wedding, shaken his hand at Christmas. He walked through this door and saw Adrian sitting at the table, and his face did the thing that faces do when a person walks into a room expecting one reality and finds another, a brief total failure of composure, replaced almost immediately by the careful blankness of a man trying to calculate how much has been discovered. Sit down, Sal, Adrian said. Giannetti sat. He did not say anything immediately. He was reading the room. Marco's position, Danny's position, the absence of anyone else, the specific quality of Adrian's expression, which was calm in the way that deep water is calm and just as difficult to see the bottom of. How much do you know? Giannetti said finally. Not a denial, not a protest, just the direct question of a man who understood that the time for deflection had passed. Everything, Adrian said. Giannetti absorbed that. He looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, something in his face had changed. Not relief exactly, but a kind of exhausted settling, the expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told he can put it down. The drive, he said. Yes, I built that insurance 3 years ago, Giannetti said. When I understood what the full scope of it was, when I understood that Pharaoh was going to burn everyone connected to this when it was over, not just you, me too, Renzo too, anyone who had touched the structure. He paused. I wasn't willing to go down for a plan I didn't originate. Tell me how you got into it, Adrian said. Giannetti looked at him. You're going to let me talk. I'm going to let you tell me everything. Then we're going to have a different conversation about what happens next. A beat. Giannetti nodded. And he talked. He talked for 41 minutes. He told Adrian about the approach which had come through Renzo 7 years ago, framed initially as a simple arrangement, a small financial favor with significant compensation. He told him about the escalation, how each ask had been slightly larger than the last, each compromise slightly deeper, until the point where the accumulated weight of what he had already done made refusal feel impossible. He told him about Pharaoh, about the man's patience, his precision, the almost clinical way he managed the people working for him, the way he made every participant feel simultaneously essential and expendable. He told Adrian about the night 3 years ago when he had finally understood the full shape of what was being built, and had realized that his own survival at the end of it was not something Pharaoh had built into the design. That was the night he had rented the safety deposit box. That was the night he had started documenting everything. When Giannetti finished talking, the room was very quiet. Adrian looked at him across the table for a long moment. You've been sitting across from me at meetings for 7 years, Adrian said. Sitting at my table, eating at my house, watching my marriage. He stopped, not because he was angry, because the specific shape of the betrayal was something he needed to hold carefully, or it would turn into something that got in the way of what needed to happen next. You watched what the surveillance did to my family and you didn't stop it. Giannetti didn't look away. No, he said. I didn't. Why? Because I was afraid, Giannetti said. And because by the time I understood what the surveillance was doing to your marriage, I had already given them enough that stopping felt like dying. He paused. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm only telling you why. Adrian nodded slowly. Here's what happens next, he said. You are going to give Marco every secondary trigger mechanism you know about. Every redundancy Pharaoh built into the system that could activate the federal file outside of your dead man's switch. Every contact point, every backup, every contingency. All of it. Tonight. And in exchange, Giannetti asked, in exchange, I don't destroy you. Adrian said it without drama as simple fact. I'm not interested in revenge, Sal. I'm interested in dismantling what was built inside my organization and making sure it can never be rebuilt. You can be useful to that, or you can be a casualty of it. That choice is the only one you have left. Giannetti was quiet for a long moment. There are 3 secondary triggers, he said. Start talking. He talked for another 2 hours. By the time they finished, it was past midnight, and Marco had a complete map of every mechanism Pharaoh had embedded in the Valenti financial structure, every tripwire, every redundancy, every contingency, and the team working through the night had already begun the careful process of disarming each one. The 40-hour clock had become 31 hours. 31 hours, and they had everything they needed. What they needed now was to use it correctly. Adrian drove back toward the city with Marco in the passenger seat, and the weight of the evening settling over him in layers. The Giannetti meeting. The secondary triggers. The complex and uncomfortable fact of Carla Ferraro's warning. And underneath all of it, Elena and Sophie's apartment in Sophie's care with 4 of his men on the building, and a door chain that she had chosen to leave unhooked. Renzo, Marco said quietly, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to say the name. We have to move on Renzo before he's told that Giannetti talked. How long do we have? If Pharaoh is in contact with Renzo directly, Pharaoh may already be telling him something has changed. We don't know how much Pharaoh knows about tonight. Marco paused. But if we wait until morning, we risk Renzo moving first. Moving how? He could run. Or... Marco stopped. Adrian. Renzo knows about Elena. He was at the Christmas dinner. He mapped her routines. He has been embedded in this operation for 14 years, and he knows that Elena is the variable that disrupted the timeline. A pause. If Pharaoh tells him that Elena identified him at the dinner, And Pharaoh may have figured that out by now. Renzo becomes dangerous in a specific way. Adrian's hands tightened on the wheel. He'd go after her. Not necessarily, but we can't rule it out. Renzo's primary motivation has always been self-preservation. If he believes Elena can identify him and connect him to the operation, she becomes a problem he might try to solve. Call the team on Sophie's building, Adrian said immediately. Upgrade the coverage. I want 2 additional people on the door, and I want them inside the building, not outside. Marco was already dialing. And then we go get Renzo, Adrian said. Tonight, right now. Renzo Marchetti lived with Lucia in a townhouse in the West Side neighborhood that Adrian had helped them purchase 7 years ago, a wedding gift essentially dressed up as a favorable loan. The kind of thing you do for family. The kind of thing that, in retrospect, had also provided a man embedded in a 20-year operation with a stable family-endorsed address and a permanent connection to the heart of what he was working to destroy. The irony of it sat in Adrian's chest like something with teeth. They pulled up in front of the townhouse at 12:44 in the morning. Adrian had made 2 calls on the way over. The first was to ensure that Lucia, who had a sister in Queens, who she visited regularly, was not in the house. Marco's quiet check confirmed she was at her sister's with the children, which was where she had been since 2 days prior. The second call was harder. He had called his cousin directly from the car while Marco watched him without comment. "Lucia," he had said when she picked up her voice, confused and worried at the pitch of a late-night call from Adrian. "What's wrong?" she had said immediately. "Is someone hurt?" "Nobody's hurt," he had said. "I need you to stay at Maria's tonight. And tomorrow. I'll explain everything as soon as I can, and I promise you that I will explain everything. But I need you to be somewhere else tonight." A silence. "Adrian, you're scaring me." "I know. I'm sorry. Stay at Maria's. Keep the kids there. Don't call Renzo." Another silence. Longer. And then, in a voice that was careful, in a way that told him she had already been carrying something she didn't know how to name. "How long have you known?" He hadn't answered that question directly. He didn't know how to answer it in a way that wouldn't break her from a distance in the dark over a phone call. "Soon," he had said. "I'll tell you everything soon." She had stayed at Maria's. He and Marco and 2 other men walked to the front door of the townhouse at 12:44. Adrian knocked. The sound of movement inside, the specific quality of it, quick-oriented alert, told Adrian that Renzo was awake. Whatever Pharaoh had communicated had reached him, and he had been awake and thinking about it. The door opened. Renzo Marchetti was 50, lean, with the kind of face that held its neutrality professionally, a face built for rooms where showing what you were thinking was a liability. He looked at Adrian, and then at the men behind him, and he did the same calculation that Giannetti had done at the beginning of the evening, except faster and with less resignation. He tried to close the door. Marco's hand was against it before it moved 2 inches. "Renzo," Adrian said, and his voice carried the particular quality that made men stop what they were doing and pay attention. "Don't." Renzo stopped. He stepped back. They walked in. The conversation with Renzo was shorter and less cooperative than the conversation with Giannetti, for the simple reason that Renzo was a man who had spent 14 years playing a role with discipline and commitment, and that kind of commitment doesn't collapse easily. He denied, then minimized, then recalibrated when presented with specifics, then attempted a version of events in which he was largely a peripheral figure who had made some poor decisions under pressure. Adrian let him run through each version without interruption. When Renzo finally ran out of alternatives, Adrian leaned forward. "Here's what I know," he said. "I know about Milan. I know about the consulting firm. I know about Pharaoh and the Ferraro Commission and the 14-year timeline. I know about the Christmas dinner and what you were doing there." He paused. "I know about all of it, Renzo. The question I'm here to ask you is not whether you did these things. The question is what you're going to do right now in this room about my cousin." Renzo looked at him. "What about Lucia?" "She doesn't know," Adrian said. "I've made sure of that. And how much she knows and when and how is something that is going to happen on a timeline and in a way that I control, not you. Not Pharaoh. Not the Ferraro family." His voice stayed level. "But I need you to understand something, Renzo. Whatever you were to Pharaoh, whatever this operation has been for the last 14 years, it is over. Tonight. And the only thing that matters to me now about your situation is making sure my cousin doesn't spend the rest of her life more damaged than she has to be." Renzo said nothing. "You have two options," Adrian said. "Option 1, you cooperate fully. You give me everything you have on the Ferraro operation's current structure, and when the time comes for Lucia to understand what her marriage actually was, you are honest with her in the way she deserves. You don't run. You don't hide. You face it." "And option 2, Renzo said. "Option 2 is something neither of us wants to spend time discussing," Adrian said simply. Renzo looked at the table. Adrian waited. The silence stretched to almost 2 minutes, an unusually long silence for a room with this much pressure in it. Adrian let it exist. Rushing the moment was a mistake. Some decisions needed to be made in their own time, even when time was the one thing nobody had. "What do you want to know?" Renzo said finally. What he gave them over the next 90 minutes was not the emotional accounting that Giannetti had provided. Renzo was too disciplined for that, too trained in self-preservation to offer anything more than operational information. But the operational information was significant. He knew things about the current Ferraro leadership structure that neither Marco's team nor the documents from the safety deposit box had covered. He knew the identity of the federal contact the Ferraros had positioned to receive the file when it was triggered. He knew the timeline of the accelerated plan, which was not 90 days, as the documentation had suggested, but significantly shorter now that Pharaoh had gone dark. "How short?" Marco asked. 24 hours, Renzo said. "Maybe less. When Pharaoh goes dark, the protocol is for the Ferraro operational team to assume the primary mechanism has been compromised and activate the secondary. They won't wait." Adrian looked at Marco. 24 hours. Which meant the 31-hour clock he had been working against had just become something closer to 20. "The federal contact," Adrian said. "The person positioned to receive the file. Give me the name." Renzo gave it. Marco wrote it down, looked at it, and then looked at Adrian with an expression that said the name was one that had implications beyond the immediate operation. "That's a problem for tomorrow," Adrian said. "Right now, Renzo, I need you to call Pharaoh." Renzo looked up. "What?" "Call him. Tell him nothing has changed. Tell him you're proceeding on schedule. Whatever your normal check-in protocol is, execute it. Right now, in front of me." "If he suspects..." "He won't suspect," Adrian said, "because you're going to make it completely normal. And in return, I'm going to give you until morning before any of this becomes official. That's enough time to make decisions about what you tell Lucia before I have to make those decisions for you." Renzo looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. He called Pharaoh. Adrian and Marco and the two other men in the room listened while Renzo had a 60-second conversation in the flat. Professional tone of two men conducting routine business, and the entire time, Adrian watched Renzo's face with the specific attention of someone who has spent decades reading the people in front of him, and noticed underneath the professionalism, underneath the trained neutrality, the very precise look of a man saying goodbye to something. Not to Pharaoh, not to the operation, to the person he had been for 14 years. Renzo hung up. "He believed it," Renzo said. "Good," Adrian said. He stood. "Somebody will stay with you tonight. Not as a threat, as a practicality." He looked at Renzo steadily. "Think about what you're going to say to Lucia. She's going to need truth from you, not strategy. She's going to need you to be a person, not an operative. I don't know if you remember how to do that, but I'm asking you to try." Renzo didn't respond. Adrian left. Back in the car. Marco on the phone with the operational team, the city going past them in the dark. Adrian felt the weight of the night sitting on him in a way that was different from the weight of the past 48 hours. This was not the weight of crisis. This was the weight of aftermath. The specific heaviness that comes when the urgent thing is handled and what is left is everything that urgency let you avoid feeling. Lucia, his cousin who had been asleep at her sister's house with her children, who had heard something in his voice on the phone tonight that she recognized without being able to name, who had asked how long he had known, in the careful voice of a woman who had maybe in some quiet, unexamined corner of herself already known that there was something to know. "How do I tell her?" Adrian said. Marco looked at him from the passenger seat. "Honestly," he said, "and soon, before she hears any version of it that isn't yours. It's going to destroy her." "Yes," Marco said. "It is." He paused. "But she's tougher than people think. People always are." Adrian thought about Elena sitting across a kitchen table in a 4-inch gap of a doorway saying, "I spent years waiting for you to choose me." He thought about Elena, who had rebuilt a life from scratch in 8 weeks while afraid and alone. He thought about Sophie opening her door at 8:47 without asking a single question. "Women in this world carry more than we give them credit for," he said. Marco glanced at him. "That's a recent insight." "Recent," Adrian agreed. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but not the same unknown number as before. Different relay pattern. Marco flagged it immediately. Adrian opened it. "We should meet. I know what you're trying to stop, and I have what you still need. CC. Carla Ferraro." He showed the phone to Marco without a word. Marco read it, let out a slow breath. "She's reaching out directly now. She warned me about Elena, and now she wants a meeting," Adrian said, "which means she has something specific, something beyond what Giannetti and Renzo gave us." "Or it's a play," Marco said carefully. "If Dominic found out she warned you, he could be using her to set something up." "Can you tell which it is?" Marco looked at the text. "Not from this alone." "Then I'm going to assume she's genuine," Adrian said. "Because the warning she sent saved Elena's life tonight, and nobody sets up an asset they're willing to burn on a warning to protect the target's wife." "That's a significant assumption." "I know." Adrian typed back tomorrow morning. "You choose where." He sent it. "She warned me about Elena specifically. Not about the operation, not about the drive, about Elena." He put the phone in his pocket. "That's not a play. That's a woman who saw something she recognized and acted on it." They drove in silence for a moment. "What did she see?" Marco asked. Adrian looked out at the city going past. "She saw what was happening to Elena. What the operation was doing to our marriage while everyone pretended not to notice." He paused. "And she recognized it." Marco was quiet for a moment. "Because the same thing was happening to hers." "That's my guess." They pulled up in front of a building on the Lower East Side, not Adrian's house, which was still being swept for additional surveillance, but a secondary property the organization maintained that Marco had cleared and deemed secure. "Go sleep," Marco said. 3 hours minimum. You're not functional if you don't." "I'll sleep when the clock runs out." "Adrian." Marco's voice shifted into the register. It only reached after 30 years of friendship, when argument became something more like plea. "You're no good to Elena, or Lucia, or the operation running on nothing. 3 hours. I will wake you at 4 if anything moves." Adrian looked at him. "She's safe," Marco said quietly. 4 men on Sophie's building. Renzo is contained. Giannetti has given us everything he has. Faro thinks nothing has changed. We have a meeting with Carla Ferraro in the morning that may give us the last piece." He paused. 3 hours, Adrian. The world can stay assembled for 3 hours. Adrian got out of the car. He went inside. He sat on the edge of a bed in a room that smelled like cleaning product and impermanence, and he took his phone out of his pocket and looked at it for a moment. And then he did something he had not done in 5 years, without a specific practical reason to do so. He texted Elena. Just 3 words. "You okay?" He sat with the phone in his hand for 2 minutes, not expecting an answer, because it was almost 2 in the morning, and Sophie's apartment was dark, and Elena was probably asleep, and she did not owe him any response to any text message ever again. And the asking was just the asking. Just a man in a borrowed room wanting to know that the person who mattered most was still somewhere in the world and intact. His phone lit up. Yes. He looked at those two words for a long moment. Then he typed, "Getting there." She replied almost immediately. "Good." He put the phone on the nightstand. He lay back. He closed his eyes. And somewhere in the exhausted, complicated territory between wakefulness and sleep, Adrian Valenti held on to the fact that she had answered, that she had been awake, or had woken up, or had been lying in the dark in Sophie's spare room with her phone in her hand, and had answered his message with two words that were small and enormous and everything in between. Yes. She was still asking about him. Even now. Even after everything. That was Elena. That had always been Elena. He had just been too far away to see it clearly until she was gone. 3 hours felt like both too long and not long enough. His phone went off at 4 o'clock, precisely Marco's name on the screen, and Adrian was sitting up before the second buzz, because he had not been truly asleep anyway. "Tell me," he said. "Pharaoh moved," Marco said. His voice was tight. 40 minutes ago. He checked out of the hotel and we lost him for about 20 minutes, but we picked him up again on the traffic system. He's not running. He's consolidating. Where is he going? He met with 2 people in the last hour, both connected to the Ferraro operational team, and Adrian... Marco paused. "We think we know what he's doing. He's not waiting for the dead man's switch, and he's not using the secondary triggers. He's taking the file directly to his federal contact, bypassing every mechanism, making a direct delivery. How long? Best estimate he moves on the delivery at sunrise, which gives us..." Marco stopped. "Approximately 2 hours." 2 hours. The 20-hour clock had become 2. "The federal contact's name Renzo gave us," Adrian said. "Do we have a way to reach them?" "That's what I've been working on for the last hour," Marco said. "And Adrian, this is the part that changes everything. The federal contact is not someone the Ferraros own. He's not dirty. He's a legitimate investigator who was positioned to receive information through a channel that would make it look like a legitimate tip." A pause. "Which means we can reach him legitimately. We can get to him before Pharaoh does present the counter-documentation and let him see the full picture, both the fabricated file and the evidence of its fabrication, before Pharaoh's version arrives." Adrian stood up. "Can we get to him in 2 hours?" "I've already made contact through a legal intermediary," Marco said. "He's willing to receive documentation, but Adrian, he's going to want to meet with you directly. Not an intermediary. You. Going directly to a federal investigator before sunrise with documentation about a 20-year criminal operation designed to frame you was objectively one of the most significant things Adrian Valenti had ever done. It was also possibly the thing that saved everything." "Where and when?" he said. Marco gave him the details. Adrian picked up his jacket. He was already moving. "Marco," he said before he left the room, "when this is over, and it's going to be over by sunrise, I need you to set something up for me." "Name it." "Elena asked me once years ago to take a weekend and go somewhere that wasn't connected to any of this. No business, no phones, no organization. Just us." He paused. "I said I would, and then I didn't." Marco was quiet for a moment. "You want me to arrange it?" "When this is over, yes." He opened the door. "She may not say yes, but I want to be able to ask her properly, with something real behind the asking." "I'll take care of it," Marco said. Adrian walked out into the pre-dawn dark of a city that was about to find out that the Valenti name was harder to destroy than 20 years of patience had anticipated, carrying the weight of everything that had happened in the last 3 days. And also somewhere underneath all of it, the small persistent warmth of 2 words on a phone screen. Yes. She was still asking about him. He was going to spend whatever time he had left making sure the answer was always worth giving. The federal investigator's name was Daniel Reyes, and he arrived at the meeting point at 5:17 in the morning with 2 colleagues and the specific expression of a man who had been doing this job long enough to know when something significant was walking through the door. Adrian walked in alone. He had argued with Marco about that for 6 minutes on the phone, and Marco had lost because Adrian understood something that Marco's operational instincts sometimes missed, that certain conversations required a person to walk into a room without armor, without the visible weight of the organization behind him, without anything that looked like power. Because the moment you walked into a room with a federal investigator carrying visible power, you became the thing he was there to investigate, rather than the person asking for his help. So Adrian walked in alone with a folder under his arm, and nothing else, and sat down across from Daniel Reyes and two colleagues whose names he wasn't given, and he put the folder on the table and said, "I need you to look at what's in here before someone else gets to you this morning, with a different version of the same story." Reyes looked at him for a moment. "You're Adrian Valenti?" "Yes." "The file I was told to expect," Reyes began, "is fabricated," Adrian said. "Not entirely. The real documents in it are real. My signatures are genuine. The financial structures reference things that actually exist. That's what makes it effective." He opened the folder. But the context surrounding those documents was constructed over 11 months by a man named Vincenzo Ferro, commissioned by the Ferraro family, using an inside source in my organization, who has now cooperated fully and documented the construction. He slid the first set of papers across the table. "This is the authentic record of how it was built, who built it, when, and why." Reyes picked it up. He read. Adrian sat quietly and let him read because there was nothing to add and no performance would help here. Either the documentation was sufficient or it wasn't. Either the truth was legible or it wasn't. Reyes read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he set the papers down and looked at Adrian. "The inside source," he said. "Salvatore Giannetti." "He's cooperating," Adrian said. "Fully. He'll speak to whoever needs to speak to him. And the man who commissioned the fabrication. You're saying this goes to the Ferraro family directly?" "To the current leadership, yes. But the original commission came from Dominic Ferraro Sr. 20 years ago. His son inherited the operation." Adrian paused. "I can give you documentation of the full chain. Names, dates, financial records showing how the operation was funded over 2 decades. Reyes exchanged a look with the colleague on his left, a fast, compressed look that carried a significant amount of information between two people who had worked together for a long time. "The delivery Ferro is planning to make this morning," Reyes said. "You're aware of it." "That's why I'm here at 5 in the morning, Adrian said. Another look between the two colleagues. "We're going to need several hours with this material," Reyes said carefully. "You have it," Adrian said. "I'll make every person with direct knowledge of the operation available to you on whatever timeline you require. But I need you to understand that Ferro is moving right now, and whatever he delivers to whatever contact he has in your organization is going to be the fabricated version of the story. And the fabricated version is very well constructed." Reyes looked at him steadily. "You're telling me someone in my organization is his contact point. I'm telling you someone was positioned to receive information from his network. Whether that person knows the source is compromised or believes they're receiving a legitimate tip, I don't know which it is. But I know the delivery is coming this morning, and I know the name of the person it was going to." He slid another piece of paper across the table. Reyes looked at the name. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "I see," he said. "I thought you might," Adrian said. Reyes picked up his phone, made a call, said 3 sentences into it that were quiet enough that Adrian couldn't hear the words, only the tone decisive, immediate, the tone of someone issuing instructions that will be followed without question. He hung up. "We're going to need you to stay available today," Reyes said. "I'm not going anywhere," Adrian said. He walked out of that building at 6 o'clock in the morning into the first gray light of a sunrise that felt, for reasons he couldn't entirely rationalize, like something he had needed to see from the outside. Marco was waiting. "Well," Marco said. "He read it," Adrian said. "He made a call before I left the room. To intercept Ferro's delivery. That's my read." Marco exhaled. "And the contact inside the federal office," Reyes knew the name, Adrian said. He recognized it in a way that told me it was someone he'd already had questions about. He got into the car. We didn't just stop Faro this morning. We handed them something they've been trying to find from the inside. Marco sat quietly for a moment. So it's over. The operational part, Adrian said. Yes. Marco understood the distinction without being told. The operational part was over. The personal part, the part that had started with a wedding ring on a kitchen table and a 7-sentence letter and 142 dinners, that part was not over. That part had barely begun. Carla Ferraro, Adrian said. She still wants to meet. Given what happened this morning, the Ferraro family is going to be occupied with significant problems of their own by noon, Marco said. Carla Ferraro may not be in a position to meet safely. Then we protect that meeting, Adrian said. Whatever she has left to tell me, she was willing to risk her husband's response to send me that warning about Elena. That's not nothing. That's a woman who made a choice that cost her something. He paused. She deserves the meeting she asked for. Marco nodded. I'll arrange it. And Marco. Adrian looked out the window at the city coming awake around them. I need to go see Elena. A beat. Now. Soon. There are a few things I need to do first. He thought of Lucia. He thought of his cousin asleep at her sister's house, not yet knowing what this morning was going to bring her. Lucia first. It was the hardest conversation of the last 3 days. Not because Lucia didn't already know somewhere in the part of herself she had been carefully not examining. She did. Adrian could hear it in her voice, even before he said the first difficult sentence, the way she had been awake when he called at 7 in the morning. The way her hello carried the quality of someone who had been lying in the dark not sleeping, waiting for the information they already half possessed. He told her as plainly and completely as he could. He did not manage it or package it. He told her the true sequence the Milan firm, the 20-year operation, the 14 years of her marriage, used as a mechanism of access. He told her that Renzo had cooperated. He told her what the cooperation had cost Renzo, and what it might mean for his situation going forward. He told her that none of what had happened to her marriage was her fault, which was both true and completely insufficient to the scale of what she was absorbing. She did not cry while he was on the phone. She was silent for most of it. A specific kind of silence that he recognized from the last 3 days. The silence of someone receiving information that is reconfiguring their understanding of a foundational thing. When he finished, she said, I need to talk to my children. I know, he said. They love him, she said. Her voice was very careful. I know that too. How do I? She stopped. Started again. How do I tell them that the man who put them to bed every night was also? She stopped again. I don't know how to do that, Adrian. You don't have to know today, he said. You only have to get to today. The next part comes after. A long silence. Elena left you, Lucia said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, Adrian said. Is she coming back? He thought about the door chain and the coffee across the table, and 2 words on a phone screen at 2 in the morning. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I'm working on being someone worth coming back to. Lucia was quiet for a moment. She always deserved better, she said. Not as an accusation, just truth. She loved you so much, and you were always somewhere else. I know, he said. Don't do that again, Lucia said. If she gives you another chance, don't do that again. I won't, he said. After he hung up, he sat for a moment in the car with the phone in his hand and the morning light coming through the windows, and then he got out and went to do the last operational piece that needed doing before he could consider anything else. Vincenzo Faro De Luca was picked up by federal agents at 7:43 in the morning while attempting to make contact with his inside source at a coffee shop near the federal building. The intercept was clean. The inside source, a mid-level investigator named Paul Greaves, who had received small payments through a shell company over 4 years, and had believed apparently that the information he would eventually be asked to pass along would never actually arrive, was taken into a separate room for a conversation that would last most of the morning. Marco texted Adrian the confirmation at 7:51. 2 words. "It's done." Adrian read them. He sat with them for a moment. Then he called Sophie's apartment. Sophie answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the careful alertness of someone who had not slept particularly well and was operating on protective instinct. "Is she awake?" Adrian asked. "She's been awake since 5, Sophie said. There was a pause. "She's been sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee and not talking for the last 2 hours, which means she's thinking about something she's not ready to say yet." Another pause. "You should come." "I'm on my way," he said. He knocked on Sophie's door at 8:23. Sophie opened it, looked at him with the frank and unsentimental expression of a woman who had spent the last 12 hours watching her best friend sit with the specific pain of a marriage that was both over and not over, and said, "She's in the kitchen. I'm going out to get more coffee from the place on the corner, and I'm going to take approximately 45 minutes to do it." "Thank you," he said. Sophie picked up her bag and walked past him into the hallway without another word. He closed the door. He walked to the kitchen. Elena was sitting at the table with both hands around a cup and her eyes on the window, and she heard him come in, and she didn't turn around immediately. She let him cross the room and sit down across from her, and then she looked at him, and what he saw in her face was not the composed, careful woman from the apartment door 2 days ago. What he saw was someone who was tired and real and present in a way that the composure had been in its own way protecting against. "It's over," she said. "Yes," he said. "Faro is in federal custody. The fabricated file has been countered. Giannetti and Renzo are cooperating. The Ferraro operation is being unwound as of this morning." She looked at him steadily. "And your organization?" "There's going to be a period of significant reconstruction," he said honestly. "The financial structures that Giannetti managed are going to need to be rebuilt from the ground up. There are going to be investigations. There are going to be legal processes I have to cooperate with. This morning I spent an hour with a federal investigator, and that conversation is not the last one we're going to have." He paused. "It's not a clean ending. It's a manageable one." She nodded slowly. "And Lucia, I talked to her this morning." He said it with the weight it carried. "She's at her sister's. She's going to be in a very dark place for a while. She needs people around her. I know. I'm going to make sure she has them." He paused. "You were always good to her." "She was always good to me," Elena said simply. "She's one of the people in your world who treated me like a person instead of a position." He heard that, let it sit where it needed to sit. They were quiet for the moment. Not the uncomfortable silence of two people who don't know what to say, but the fuller silence of two people who have a great deal to say and are choosing the order of it carefully. "I talked to Carla Ferraro," Adrian said. Elena looked up. "The warning text. We met this morning briefly before the operation closed. She wanted to explain why she sent it." He paused. "She said she'd been watching what the operation was doing to our marriage for 2 years. She said she recognized it because her own marriage had been built on a similar kind of managed distance. That she had lived inside something that looked like a real life from the outside and felt like a performance from the inside." He paused. "She said she saw Elena Rossi leaving her husband's house with a suitcase in the middle of the night through a surveillance feed that her husband's people were running, and she decided she wasn't going to watch another woman be treated like a variable in someone else's plan." Elena was very still. "She took a significant risk to send that warning," Adrian said. "I know," Elena said softly. "Because she saw something in what was happening to you that she recognized from her own life." Elena looked at the table for a moment. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright in a way she didn't try to manage. "Is she going to be okay?" Adrian thought about Carla Ferraro, about the specific courage of a woman who had sent a warning text from inside her husband's operation because she had recognized the shape of a woman being erased and had decided quietly and at significant personal cost to do something about it. "I think she's going to figure that out," he said. "She struck me as someone who has been waiting to make a decision for a long time and may have just made it." Elena nodded. The silence came back. It held different things in it now. "I have something to ask you," Adrian said, "and I want to be clear before I ask it that the answer you give is the right answer, whatever it is. I'm not asking in order to get a specific response. I'm asking because I want to be honest with you, and I want to be honest with myself, and the only way I know how to do that anymore is to say the thing directly instead of waiting for the right moment." He looked at her steadily. "I've learned that the right moment is always right now." Elena looked at him. "Will you give me time?" he said. "Not a second chance, not a return to what we were. I'm not asking for the marriage we had. I know that version is gone, and it should be because that version wasn't good enough for you." He paused. "I'm asking for time to show you something different, to be someone different, not through promises. I know what my promises have been worth, but through days. One day at a time in whatever form you're comfortable with, from whatever distance you need." He held her eyes. "I'm asking you to let me try to become someone worth choosing. And I'm asking you to be honest with me if I stop being that person again." Elena held his gaze for a long time. He could see her thinking, not calculating, not managing, just genuinely sitting with the question the way she sat with everything that mattered fully and without pretense. "You understand," she said carefully, "that I am not going back to that house, not right now, maybe not ever. I know. You understand that I still have an apartment in Carver Heights and a job that starts on Monday. I know that too. And you understand that I spent 8 weeks building something for myself that is mine," she said. "Not yours, not ours, mine. And I'm not giving that up." "I'm not asking you to," he said. She looked at him for another moment. "What are you asking for exactly?" "Coffee," he said. "Sometimes, when you're willing, in whatever place you choose." He paused. "And honesty. If I do something wrong, you tell me. If I'm not showing up the right way, you tell me. No more saving it until there's nothing left." He paused again. "And I'll do the same. No more disappearing into the organization and hoping you understand. No more choosing the easier thing." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Coffee," she said. "To start." She looked at him across the table. This woman who had counted 142 dinners and packed her practical shoes and recognized a face that didn't match a name and kept an 8-week secret that had helped save everything. This woman who had asked him, "Yes, you," at 2 in the morning, from a borrowed room, and what moved across her face was not forgiveness, because forgiveness was not a single moment. It was not reconciliation, because reconciliation was not a morning conversation. What moved across her face was the particular expression of a person who has been hurt enough to know what they're worth, and is considering carefully and with full awareness of the risk, whether the thing in front of them might be worth the risk of trying. "I want a different kind of life than the one we had," she said. "I need you to understand that before anything else. Not bigger. Not more protected. Not more managed. Different." She paused. "I want to be seen in it. Every day, not just when there's a crisis. I want to matter in the ordinary moments. I want you to know what I'm reading and what I'm worrying about and what makes me laugh. I want the normal things, the things that don't require an emergency to make you pay attention." "I know," he said. "I know exactly how much I failed at those things." "Do you?" she said. Not as a challenge, as a genuine question. "I know that you ate dinner alone 142 times, he said. "I know that you cried in the shower and didn't call anyone because you had learned I wasn't worth calling. I know that you recognized a dangerous man at my dinner table and sat with that information alone for 8 weeks because I had spent 5 years teaching you that bringing things to me produced nothing." He stopped. "I know what I cost you. I know it's not something you should forgive quickly or easily. I know I'm starting from somewhere worse than zero, because at least from zero, you haven't already proven to someone that you're not reliable." He held her eyes. "But I also know that I am not the same person who came home at 4:53 in the morning and found a wedding ring on the kitchen table. That person didn't understand what he had. I understand now." Elena looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she stood up, picked up the coffee pot, and refilled his cup. She sat back down, and she said, "Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this." He looked at her. "What? Tell me something ordinary," she said. "Something you've been thinking about that isn't the Ferraros or Gianetti or the operation or any of it. Something real." She looked at him steadily. "Because if we're going to start something different, I want to know if you still know how to just talk to me." He sat with that for a moment, and then because she had asked for something real, he gave her something real. "I've been thinking about my father's house in upstate New York," he said. "The place where I grew up. I drove past it once about a year ago, and it was empty. The family that bought it after my father died had moved out. And I've been thinking about it since. Not because I want to buy it back, just because I've been thinking about the person I was before I built all of this." He paused. "Before I decided that control was the same thing as safety." Elena looked at him. "Your father had a garden," she said. He looked at her. "You remember that? You told me about it on our third date," she said. "You said he grew tomatoes and that he used to wake up before anyone else in the house to go check on them. You said it was the only thing he did that wasn't about power or money or the operation." She paused. "You said you used to think it was embarrassing. And then you said that when he died, you missed the tomatoes more than almost anything else because they were the most human thing about him." He looked at her. He had forgotten he told her that. He had forgotten that the person he was on their third date had been someone who told women about his father's tomatoes before he had decided to replace every real thing about himself with something more controlled and more impressive and more deliberately armored. "You remembered that," he said. "I remember everything you ever told me," she said simply. "That's the thing about people who are paying attention. They keep everything." He felt that move through him from his chest outward. "Elena," he said. "I know," she said quietly. They sat in Sophie's kitchen in the morning light, with 2 cups of coffee and 5 years of damage between them. And something else between them too, something smaller and more stubborn than damage. Something that had survived being ignored and being afraid, and 8 weeks alone and a wedding ring on a kitchen table. Something that had sent a text message at 2 in the morning and gotten an answer. "I'm not promising anything right now," she said. "I need you to understand that. I'm not saying yes to anything except coffee." "I know," he said. "I'm going to go to my apartment tonight," she said. "And I'm going to start my job on Monday. And I'm going to build the life I planned for myself." "That's exactly what you should do," he said. "And if you want to call me," she said, "you can call me, not to update me on operational developments, not because there's a reason, just to talk." She looked at him steadily. "The way people who are trying to know each other actually call." "Okay," he said. "And if I don't answer," she said, "it doesn't mean no. It means I'm not ready yet. And you have to be able to sit with that without making it into something to manage or fix." "Okay," he said again. She studied him for the moment. Then she said, "Why do you think it's going to be different this time?" He thought about the question carefully. He had learned in the last 4 days that she deserved careful answers. "Because I know what I lost," he said. "Not in a general way, not as a concept. I know the specific things. The dinner conversations I missed, the nights you waited, the moments you brought me something important and I put it in a drawer." He paused. "I've been making decisions based on what I thought I could afford to lose. And I discovered that the thing I can't afford to lose is exactly the thing I treated most casually." He looked at her. "I don't think it'll be different because I want it to be. I think it'll be different because I finally understand the cost of it being the same. Those are 2 very different reasons." Elena was quiet for the long moment. Then she said, That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 5 years. I know, he said. I'm sorry it took this long. She looked at him across the table, and in that moment, the 5 years between them were present, all of it, the good years and the lost years, and the year of dinners. She ate alone, and the 8 weeks she spent being afraid by herself, and the night she packed her practical shoes and left her wedding ring on the table, and chose herself for the first time in longer than she could name. All of it was present, and something else was present too. The third date. His father's tomatoes. A woman who kept everything. A man who was finally at 39 years old, learning to pay attention. You should go, she said. You have things to handle today. I do, he said. Lucia needs people around her. I know. He stood, picked up his jacket, paused at the kitchen doorway. For what it's worth, he said. The life you built in 8 weeks, the apartment, the job, the plan you made for yourself while you were afraid and alone. I want you to keep all of it. I don't want you to give up a single piece of it. She looked at him. I know you don't need my permission for that, he said. I'm just saying I'm proud of you. For doing it. For having the courage to choose yourself. He paused. I should have been the one who made it so you never had to. Elena looked at him for a moment. Go, she said softly. Come back when you're ready to have a normal conversation about nothing important. He almost smiled. Like tomatoes. Like whatever, she said. Something ordinary. He nodded. He left. 3 flights down, out into the morning. The city fully awake now around him. Marco's car at the curb with Marco inside it reading something on his phone, with the patience of a man who understood that certain things took the time they took. Adrian got in. Marco looked at him. Well, Marco said. Coffee, Adrian said. Marco looked at him for a moment. That's it. 3 days, a 20-year criminal operation, a federal intervention, and you get coffee. Yes, Adrian said. Marco considered this for a moment. That's probably the right answer, he said. It's the only answer she has right now, Adrian said. And it's enough. He meant it. He felt it in the specific way that a man feels something when it is true, rather than wished, not warm, not simple, but solid, real. The kind of thing you can build on, if you're patient enough and honest enough and willing to show up for the ordinary moments instead of only the ones that require everything you have. Coffee, 1 day at a time. One ordinary conversation about nothing important. That was where it started. That was where everything started, if you were paying attention, not in the grand gestures, not in the crises, not in the moments when someone needed you. Because the alternative was disaster. In the tomatoes. In the dinner conversations, in the text message sent at 2 a.m. with no practical reason except wanting to know that the person you loved was somewhere in the world and okay. In the answer, yes. 3 months later, Adrian Valenti knocked on the door of apartment 304 in Carver Heights, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner that Elena had told him on their 6th phone call was the best in the neighborhood. She opened the door without the chain. She took the coffee. She stepped back to let him in. And this time, when he sat down at her kitchen table, he was not a man arriving with a warning or an apology or an operational crisis or anything that required her to be careful about what she let in. He was a man who had driven 40 minutes on a Saturday morning because she had mentioned in passing 3 days earlier that she was making her father's recipe for the first time since he died, and she wasn't sure she remembered it correctly, and she was going to try anyway. He had not said he was coming. He had simply shown up. Not because there was a reason, because he wanted to. Because she was there. Because showing up for the ordinary things, the Saturday morning things, the recipe things, the things that don't require an emergency to make them matter, was what love actually was underneath all the power and the empire and the noise. It was this. 2 people, a kitchen, coffee, the quiet, unglamorous daily choice to be present for the person beside you. Elena looked at him across the table and said, You remembered. You mentioned it on Tuesday, he said. She studied him for a moment. You were listening? I'm always listening now, he said. I know I'm late to it, but I'm not going to stop. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had taken 5 years to understand something she had known from the beginning, who had nearly lost everything by choosing the easier version of himself, who had spent the last 3 months calling her on Tuesday evenings about nothing in particular, and showing up on Saturday mornings with coffee from the right place, and asking her questions about her job and her life, and the book she was reading and what she was thinking about this man who was still not finished becoming who he needed to be, but who was day by day and without drama actually trying. She picked up her coffee. The recipe calls for rosemary, she said. I don't know if I have enough. I'll go get more, he said immediately. The store is 6 blocks. I know where it is, he said. Elena looked at him, and then for the first time in longer than either of them could clearly remember, she smiled at him. Not the managed smile of a woman trying to be okay. Not the careful smile of someone protecting themselves from further damage. But the real one. The one that reached her eyes. The one he had spent 5 years being too distracted to fully look at. 6 blocks, she said. Don't take 40 minutes. 10 minutes, he said. 15, she said. The good rosemary is on the back shelf. He stood up. He went to get rosemary. And the woman who had once counted 142 dinners alone watched the door close behind the man who was finally learning one ordinary morning at a time that the greatest thing he would ever build had nothing to do with power or empire or the fear his name inspired in rooms full of dangerous people. It was this, her. The chance she had not been required to give him. The chance she had chosen to give him anyway. Because love, when it is real, when it has survived the worst version of itself, and come through it without pretending the damage didn't happen, is not a feeling that arrives fully formed and stays forever without tending. It is a choice. Made every day. In the small things, in the rosemary, in the showing up. Adrian Valenti had learned that too late, and almost not at all, and just barely in time, and he spent every ordinary morning after that making sure Elena Rossi never had a reason to count the dinners again. That was the story. Not of a mafia boss who saved the day, but of a man who finally learned to stay.